Chapter 945. The next moment, a light kiss came, catching her off guard. It was a short moment, just the time it took for the traffic light to turn red. The minty tobacco scent and the slight coolness on her lips seeped into her mouth. At this moment, Chinemo was still in his police uniform, the curve of his face looking different from the light behind him. Her heart raced and her mind went blank for a second. When Bojio came back to her senses, Chinemo had already widened the distance between them. She came face to face with his dark brows and beautiful thin lips. She could still smell his scent. The lights at the junction started to change. Chinemo seemed to be smiling, starting the car. From the corner of his eyes, she could see the youngster's ears gradually turning red. Bojio felt that the heat had to die down. She coughed lightly, whipping out her phone. She first glanced at the news. The heat regarding the case had yet to die down. There were both good and bad comments. She paused slightly before shifting her gaze away, intending to read the competition novels that the Almighty had mentioned on the official website. There were indeed quite a few. It wasn't just her, there were novels from Lin Feng and Jianghu as well. Bojio clicked on a novel about her and the Almighty. She only read the first 3 chapters. When she reached the 4th chapter, she felt that something was amiss. Why did the novel describe her as a cold young man? It was a complete reversal of the CP. The novel was written by a member of the club. Basically, it followed the rules of esports novels. They only wrote about her interactions with the Almighty during competitions. For some reason, it seemed like a pure love novel. Both she and the Almighty were like that. Lin Feng and Jianghu's were probably even more so. Bojio arched a brow. She clicked on a novel and was about to read it when her phone rang. Unexpectedly, his phone rang. The caller ID was Lin Feng. Bojio pressed the answer button. Lin Feng's voice came from the other end, looking as though he was facing a formidable enemy. "Little Spade, you have to take me in tonight. Let me sleep at your house." "Sleep at my house?" Bojio arched a brow. "Why do you suddenly want to sleep at my house? We've known each other for a long time. I'm a senior and you're a junior. It's time for the two of us to have a heart-to-heart talk. Let's have a pajama party or something. I'll provide alcohol to help you reduce your burden before the competition. You don't have to thank me too much. You can tell me anything you want." Lin Feng stuttered for a while, then lowered his voice and said, "You're right." Bojio shifted her phone to the other side. She spoke slowly but got straight to the point. "If you tell me the real reason, I might consider letting you go." Lin Feng paused, then stuffed the clothes in his hands into his bag. Jianghu has gone crazy. He was reading a novel on his phone. I thought it was a good novel, so I took a look out of curiosity. I didn't expect it to be about him and me. He even said that when he had time, he would try everything in the novel on me. I gave him a kick. My mom came in and thought I was bullying him. To prevent me from losing control and crippling him before the competition, Little Spade, you have to take me in. Lin Feng paused, then stuffed the clothes in his hands into his bag. Jianghu has gone crazy. Lin Feng paused, stuffing the clothes in his hands into his bag. Chinemo, who was sitting beside Bojio, could hear the voice coming from the phone. In the end, it was because Lin Feng was gritting his teeth. Chinemo didn't want anyone to disturb their time alone. He arched a brow. "Are you sure you're not afraid of Jianghu forcing you to do something?" Lin Feng hadn't expected the voice to be his captain. When he heard Chinmo's words, he jumped up like a cat. "Why would I be afraid of him?" "Don't be afraid, you can sleep at home." Chinmo's tone didn't change. Bojio shook her head. Lin Feng wasn't a match for the Almighty at his level. However, there were still benefits to being naive. "Captain, what are you talking about? The signal isn't good. That's all. Get Little Spade to prepare, I'll be there in a while." With a snap, Lin Feng hung up the phone. It was obvious that he didn't want to play along with the Almighty. He was quick to escape. Bojio sighed internally. When she turned, she realized that the Almighty's eyes had darkened. Someone was going to be in trouble. Chinemo turned the steering wheel. "I'm going to your house today." Bojio wanted to say, "It's fine, I'll be fine." The Almighty added, "Lin Feng likes to put his arm around someone's shoulder. Do you want him to find out that you're the girl who kissed me at the ball?" Bojio imagined Lin Feng's expression and words if he found out about it. She hid it instantly. But she was the one who was kissed. How did the Almighty make it sound like they were kissing? At this moment, Chinmo's phone rang. It was a call from Director Huang. The crime squad couldn't find the first suspect in the video. Even though they had sent him the video, they couldn't find him. There wasn't a single trace of him in the country's files. Besides, there was another important piece of information. The maiden's sacrifice isn't just happening in our country. Today we received a secret report from a neighboring country. There are people in Japan who have fallen into the maiden's sacrifice as well. Many of them are being lured to commit suicide. Similar to what we saw today, there is a website dedicated to gathering such people. Then they would open a post to record their actions. It would affect people's values, and from there, it would destroy the victim's mental defenses, causing a large number of suicides. Those who join seem to have been brainwashed and are extremely evil. The Japanese have found the website, but after destroying it, there would still be another. Unless the source of the organization is found, the affected people would still join. Someone left a comment saying, "Go to hell, it's useless to live like this. Other than Almighty, no one is clean. If you want to save Almighty, you have to follow Almighty's will." Almighty? Chinamo asked faintly. Oh. Director Huang sighed. They are adamant that their Almighty is Z. Bojio could hear the voice, but she didn't show it. Even now, she hadn't forgotten that the Almighty was still suspicious of her. He could still see through her expression. As expected, Chinamo stopped the car at the side. He glanced at the youngster before pressing the Bluetooth earpiece. Are there any suspicious terrorist organizations in Japan? No. Director Huang was slightly worried because he had seen such a method before. Back then, people had used tarot cards to choose their targets in high schools. Back then, they had used the internet to control people's thoughts and hypnotize them. They had lured people to commit suicide, and in the end, the high school had sunk into unprecedented chaos. Everyone seemed to have been hatched by the murderer and were extremely dangerous. Back then, it hadn't been as serious as it was now. But it was still the work of a hacker. It had been the same 3 years ago. At that time, more than half of the students in the high school had been brainwashed while the other half had been brought to the border. The students weren't the only ones affected. There were teachers as well. People often said that staying with the devil for too long would turn you into a devil. No country would allow such a thing to happen. So many of their citizens had been controlled. They had to think of a way to save them. But as they were at the border, the terrain was complicated and normal soldiers wouldn't be able to handle it. Besides, it wasn't just a battle, they had to consider the fact that the other party was a psychologist. Hence, the mission had fallen onto Chin Mo's shoulders. It was a mission that no one was willing to recall. In that mission, some Special Forces soldiers saw with their own eyes that the hostages who were originally taken away were subtly influenced to become the same kind of people as those people. Their almost numb and passionate faces looked as if they had been bewitched. In reality, those who felt that stealing from others wasn't wrong were easily influenced and turned into devils. In the country, some believed in Buddhism, some believed in Taoism, and some believed in karma. All of these beliefs were telling the world that evil would result in evil. They had to know how to differentiate between right and wrong and not be a sinner. Why was that? Because there were too many people who couldn't differentiate between right and wrong. It could even be said that he would impose his dark thoughts on others. That was the reason why people with twisted views were the scariest. But under normal circumstances, there was another characteristic of people with twisted views. That was stupidity. They would easily believe the words that others said out of vanity. If it was a psychologist, it would be a piece of cake to find them. In the end, all the hostages were rescued. But it was at the cost of Chin Mo's amnesia. No one knew where the knot in his heart was. The people above were also worried that he had been subconsciously hypnotized by the other party. Regardless of the suspicion, it turned into regret in the end. Chin Mo's amnesia was selective, which meant that the case existed in his mind, but he couldn't remember what he had forgotten. But now, Director Huang wasn't the only one who found the case familiar. Chinamo found it familiar too. When the sense of familiarity surged into his mind, a piercing pain shot through his brain. Chinamo frowned instinctively, reaching out to press his temples. In that instant, his entire face turned pale. Fragmented images flashed across his mind, making it impossible for him to catch them. But one of the images turned into a dark river. He seemed to be trying to catch something, but he couldn't catch it no matter how hard he tried. At that moment, Chinmo's eyes became a lot lighter. His pupils constricted and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Bojio was sitting beside him. When she called Chinamo the first time, he didn't react at all. It was as though he had fallen into a nightmare from a long time ago. Brother Imo, Brother Imo? Bojio called him 5 times. That was when Chinamo pulled himself back from the scene. Director Huang heard the commotion and asked anxiously, "Did something happen? Do you need me to go over?" "It's fine." Chinamo finally returned to his normal state. Director Huang wasn't in the car, so he wasn't aware of what had happened. "You really scared me, I thought something happened." "Nothing." Chinamo caressed the side of his face, his voice weaker. Other than that, what other information do you have? Director Huang looked at the sealed document in his hands. The hacking should have started in Asia before spreading to the other continents. The situation in the Japanese is serious and there is already a large number of suicides. They aren't able to control it completely. What you and young Master Fu did today has undoubtedly hindered the development of the organization in our country, disrupting their plan to use this incident to brainwash some people. Hence, the situation in our country isn't uncontrollable. But if we don't find the mastermind, the website won't be destroyed. Even if we destroy it today, there will be a new one tomorrow. The Japanese intend to provide technical support if we manage to capture the suspect in the video. It's fine, their support won't help. Chinamo turned the car. Let's head back. Us? It wasn't hard to guess, it was probably young Master Fu. Indeed. But Chinmo's reaction had caused her to frown. Ever since then it hadn't eased up. What exactly was it that made the Almighty so happy? Bojio was smart. Her intuition told her that the Almighty had lost his memory. But the Almighty's identity was too unique. Hoshino wasn't able to find anything. How exactly did the Almighty end up in this state? But there was one thing. 3 years ago the Almighty had worked on a case. Because of that case, the Almighty hadn't just missed the National League, he had also been resting at home for a long period of time. Was it related to that case? That was the only guess Bojio could come up with. When they reached the crime squad, they realized the tension in the air. This time, the case wasn't just a slap to Smith's face, it had also allowed Chinamo to enter and leave the crime squad freely. Bojio noticed that the person speaking to Director Huang wasn't from the crime squad. He was from the Japanese. Based on their accent, she could tell that they were from the Japanese. Director Huang caught sight of them and walked over with his men. He turned to Chinamo. These two are Interpol officers from the Japanese. Before this, we had already searched all the places where Jianghu City's tall and slender man would appear, but without his real identity, it's hard to find him. Do you have any ideas? Chinamo didn't reply immediately, instead turning towards the youngster beside him. Can we use the internet to find him? The tall and thin man in the video? I can give it a try. Bojio glanced up. I'll continue with the videos I found at the roadside shop. Based on the route he would take, I'll be able to get a rough idea of where he would appear and see if there are any records of him. I'll do it. Chinmo's voice was calm. Where do you think he will end up? Bojio replied, all right. As an Interpol officer, even if they weren't from the same country, they could understand their conversation. But could they really find him? Chapter 946. Of course, this youngster could be a special talent. But when this special talent picked up the laptop, the two Interpol officers glanced at each other and shook their heads. They knew it was impossible to use the internet to find out his identity. If it was so easy, they wouldn't have come to China. Their country's hacking skills were the best in Asia. This youngster was just a Chinese. His computer skills were definitely not as good as theirs. In the words of the Chinese, this seemed like a child's play in front of an expert. However, the two Interpol officers from Japan didn't say anything. Firstly, it was because of their country's etiquette. Secondly, they were here to learn from this side's experience. They wanted to know how the other side had stopped the spread of the maiden's sacrifice. According to what they knew, there was a profiler who was good at deduction that changed the outcome. Could be said that these two Japanese only wanted to fight for Chinamo. Hence, they didn't know that there was another person who had helped Chinamo. To Bojio, being in the crime squad's IP made it easier for her to investigate. That was because the surveillance cameras of some departments could be checked by the public security system. As long as she added some hacking skills, she would be able to continue her investigation. But it would be a waste of time to have someone perform facial recognition one by one to confirm the pattern of the person's appearance. On the other hand, a skilled hacker would use a human face to form a photo and use the data to track that person. But just as Chinamo had said, the profiler's judgment was needed. This meant that once the camera appeared, the person would probably appear at the next location. Based on the person's appearance at that time, they would be able to analyze his movements. Bojio's typing speed was fast. With her connection to the crime squad, she broke through the electronic systems along the streets. These systems didn't just include convenience stores, there were also ATMs and surveillance cameras installed in the parking lot. The return of the young lord of the hacker world meant that there would be people following her. Many people should be aware that a large-scale network attack couldn't be completed by just one hacker. It was just like a game which required assistance. But the only thing that couldn't be missing was the leader. The leader, who was like an eagle, could not miss any information, could break through and discern all network defenses, and could even escape nimbly. She would catch her prey swiftly. This had always been Bojio's style. It was cold and sharp, but it didn't lose its mind. The naked eye couldn't see the wires on the network. When Bojio took off, he couldn't see the other symbols flying behind her. Perhaps their behavior was different, but their purpose was the same, and that was to assist their young master. With Z's command, the others would transform into different forms to break through the defenses around them and obtain useful information. They were all gathered on Bojio, who was at the front. Hand speed was not the ultimate test of a hacker. Instead, it was how to use the code to fly faster and higher and finally lock onto the prey. Even the people behind him were blocked by layers of firewalls after collecting the information. They needed time to solve the problem. Bojio didn't stop until the entire screen changed from a series of codes to a series of video clips. Every single clip had a tall and slender figure. The expressions of the two Interpol officers standing at the side changed. It wasn't that they didn't understand the internet. It was just that they had never thought that there would be such a hidden expert in Wuxia. Even in Japan, there might not be anyone who could reach such a level of computing. No, it would be more accurate to say that none of the international experts they had seen could achieve such a feat in such a short period of time. Chinamo stood beside Bojio, one hand on one side of her body. His handsome face was noble, but when he lowered his gaze, there was a sharp glint in his eyes. Especially when his gaze landed on the screen, it seemed to penetrate one's heart. Very quickly, Bojio realized that the reason the Almighty was a top student wasn't just because of his intelligence. Also, his browsing speed was extremely fast, Bojio clicking on the images one by one. Chinmo's gaze didn't stop, he was looking at the speed of Bojio's speed. In that instant, the two Interpol officers only had one thought. The two hunks were in their line of work. As for them, they weren't even able to use their skills. Instead, they felt shocked. What exactly was the reason? The two Interpol officers couldn't find an answer because the two of them weren't in their records. But why hadn't such talents been discovered? One of the Interpol officers couldn't help but ask, wanting to find out more about the two of them. He turned towards Director Huang. What do they do? One of them was a high school student while the other was a business CEO. It wasn't enough to say it out loud. Director Huang hesitated for a moment, finally finding a common answer. Professional esports player. Esports players? The two Interpol officers hadn't expected such a profession. Esports? Gaming? Director Huang caressed his nose, finding it unbelievable. They have a competition the day after tomorrow. If you are interested, you can take a look. The Interpol officers glanced at each other. Let's catch them first. The most important thing now was to stop the maiden's sacrifice. It had to be said that Chinmo and Bojio's teamwork was indeed pleasing to the eye. The two of them were already very handsome, and with their movements, they exuded a kind of aura that seemed to be innate. One of them was devilish while the other was abstinent. Their auras seemed to complement each other. Stop. When Chinamo said this word, Emo Rua's eyes widened. The youngster raised his right hand swiftly, his coordination was very high. Chinamo looked at the few photos and closed his eyes. It was as though he could form a concrete image in his mind. The image turned from illusory to real. When he encountered something that didn't make sense, he had to quickly change his train of thought. If it was the left, there was no need for such a hurried back view. He was even more anxious when he hailed a cab. Why so anxious? If the direction wasn't left, then it would be right. What's on the right? Chinamo tilted his head, searching for some images. Hospitals, shopping malls, a direct flight to the airport? When the last word appeared in his mind, he felt a chill run down his spine. Chinamo suddenly opened his eyes. His tone wasn't fast, but it was deep. He went to the airport. Airport? It wasn't just Interpol, even Director Huang didn't think it was possible. If this person really appeared at the airport, how could he not be noticed? After all, his image had already been sent out and there would be a nationwide search. Chinamo knew what they were thinking. He glanced at Director Huang. There's a spy inside and he knows how to disguise himself. We will need the cooperation of the airport, especially the international ones. Check which flights are about to take off and stop him at the security checkpoint. We have to keep the operation a secret. There should be people at the airport. Interpol was the most concerned about the spy. His expression changed. Director Huang, you never said there's a spy inside. Such matters couldn't be known to outsiders. Director Huang was able to reach his current position, basically speaking the truth to whoever he met, and whoever he met spoke the truth to. Internal matters couldn't be told to outsiders. Besides, there were boundaries between the two countries. But it wasn't appropriate for Director Huang to say anything. Chinamo spoke again. Ever since the maiden's sacrifice, there will be a spy inside. There's one in the Japanese department as well. Or have you never thought about why every operation ends in failure? It was a very light rhetorical question, but the two Interpol officers were taken aback. They had thought about it before, but every single time, it's time to act. Director Huang didn't give the Interpol any time to think. In reality, time was precious to everyone, including the tall and slender man who had reached the airport. He had undergone a disguise, his face was slightly altered and even his clothes were the same. There was a black Bluetooth earpiece on his right ear. The Bluetooth earpiece was a sign that someone was guiding him. There aren't any policemen on your left, but there's a bookstore on your right. Go in and flip through some books to avoid the cameras. The girl sounded anxious. There's still an hour before the plane takes off. 5 minutes later, head to the security checkpoint. I will tamper with the scanner so they won't be able to confirm your features and appearance. Of course, it won't be a problem even if you imagine it. There are people there as well. As long as you don't cause too much of a commotion, you will be able to board the plane successfully. Once you board the plane, they won't be able to stop you. According to international aviation law, even if someone wants to investigate you, it will only be America. China doesn't have to be afraid of America, we have a professional lawyer to help us. The most dangerous part is before you board the plane, you have to avoid all the security guards. All right. It wasn't just the girl, even the tall and slender man was starting to panic. He hadn't expected the Chinese police to be able to lock onto him. Regardless of where he was, news of him was being broadcasted. He was wanted throughout the entire country, it was impossible for him to escape. How exactly did they manage to find him? There weren't any cameras in the corridor of the dead man. He wouldn't have been caught there. Could it be that the person above betrayed us? The tall and slender man asked darkly. The girl paused before replying. No one would give up on a huge profit and he isn't an exception. The only person who wouldn't betray us is that person. Just like the higher-ups in the Japanese, the higher they are, the more they want. The reason you were found was probably because someone used internet technology to pull up all the places that the dead man passed by. You would definitely appear there. With Chinamo around, it wouldn't be strange if he found you. What's strange is who exactly found those places. There must be someone else that we haven't noticed. Our plan has been foiled several times. The most dangerous time was when someone almost found me. I'm still not sure if that person has started to locate me. The only university beside the internet cafe is our university. I have no idea what information the boss of the internet cafe revealed to that person. But one thing is for sure, if it's the same person, we have to think about who is looking for us other than Chinamo. After you go to America, take a flight back to the Golden Triangle. Get someone to help me check if there's anyone whose hacking skills are on par with mine. All right, the tall and slender man replied. Everything will have to wait until I leave. The girl was still listening to the tall and slender man's words when she saw a huge wave of police officers heading towards his direction. His voice grew anxious. There's someone in front of you, turn right. Do you see the security checkpoint? Don't look back and don't show any strange expressions. Find a way to chat with the people around you and make them think that you are traveling abroad with a companion. There should be a tour group where you are queuing up, and the clothes you are wearing are from their tour group. Now blend in and follow the tour group in. The security officer is one of us, so he won't take the initiative to expose you. You must be fast. After hearing the girl's words, the tall and slender man quickly changed his direction and strode toward the most eye-catching spot. People who were going on a trip would be in a better mood and would be less guarded, especially when they saw someone wearing the same clothes as them. The tall and slender man was good at talking too. He found someone to chat with casually and said with a smile, I've learned some daily language before this. Uncle and Auntie, if there's anything you don't know, I'll translate for you if you want to buy something when you get there. He didn't just randomly pick these two elderly people to talk to. That was because, in terms of age, the tall and slender man was just right for people to mistake him for the old couple's son. Moreover, the old people were not xenophobic. They could start a conversation after a few words, especially when someone asked, Are you guys chatting to register for the tour group? The old man smiled. Actually, other than going on a trip, my wife and I also want to see if our grandson is used to studying there. From afar, the security officers did not know what they were talking about. When the tall and slender man helped the old man to carry his bag through the security check, the security officers who arrived only glanced over. After all, in their minds, the person they wanted to arrest must be a single person. Thus, No one saw the disdainful smile on the tall and slender man's lips after exchanging glances with one of the security officers. So what if they had locked onto him? He still managed to escape. China's security was only SOSO. Chapter 947. What's more, the boarding of the international flights had already begun. The police officers were still checking in at the security checkpoint. After all, there would be facial scans at the security checkpoint. If he was a criminal, he would definitely be identified. It would be fine if he was facing a normal criminal. After all, his ID and face wouldn't change. But they didn't know that the person they were facing was an international criminal. The tall and slender man had at least 5 IDs and corresponding IDs. He knew how to disguise himself. Moreover, the police officers wouldn't expect him to be hiding in the tour group. Therefore, even if there were people going back and forth looking for him, no one would really notice him. Why are there so many special police officers all of a sudden? Is there something wrong? There shouldn't be so many special police officers usually, right? I'm not sure, but he's so handsome. The appearance of the large number of special police officers caused the people in the airport to start discussing. Gradually, the people also realized that the security today seemed to be especially strict. There were also special police officers patrolling near the boarding gates. At the same time, there were 3 planes flying abroad. And the distance between each boarding gate was very far. It was also a problem to decide which one to control. Moreover, international flights were different from domestic flights. Sometimes, even the control had to do diplomatic work in advance. Before getting the documents, no one had any right to stop anyone from entering the plane. At most, they could find an excuse to delay the flight, but they couldn't cancel the flight. Obviously, the police officers were still worried. In the end, 2 people went to each boarding gate. They still didn't see the target. The tall and slender man held the registration card and followed behind the 2 old men. They talked and laughed as they walked into the boarding gate. The special police officer reached out and stopped him. He glanced at his ID and face, then looked at the old man behind him. At that moment, the tall and slender man's palms were sweating. But he believed that God still cared for him. The special police officer didn't stare at him for long. He quickly gave him a hand gesture. The tall and slender man smiled and said, "Thank you." With a smile on his face, he walked into the boarding gate. Then he went through the built passage and walked directly in the direction of the plane. The beautiful space station was in front of the cabin, welcoming all the passengers with great etiquette. Once he got on the plane, it would be harder for those people to find him. The tall and slender man found a seat by the window and sat down. He raised his hand to look at the watch on his wrist and calculated the time. In the airport, Director Huang's expression wasn't good. "No suspicious person?" "Yes, Chief, we have searched everywhere." During the security check, we found some people who brought some things onto the plane. They were all detained by us, but the people who were detained are not suspects. Director Huang's breathing deepened. "Are you sure there isn't anyone suspicious?" "He is definitely at the airport." Qin Mo's reasoning had never been wrong. How could it not be possible? "Director Huang, we've really sent people to every security checkpoint. The information from the airport is the same. This person hasn't appeared." Director Huang's face turned stern. "Continue the search. There's no need to look for the security checkpoint." An indifferent voice rang out. Director Huang turned around, spotting Qin Mo standing in the middle with one hand stuffed into his trouser pocket, his eyes fixed on the clock. His side profile was still handsome and elegant, attracting everyone's attention immediately. Moreover, there was a youngster with a unique hair color standing beside him. However, Bojio's reaction was faster. When she saw someone looking in her direction, she took off her black hooded top and pulled the hood up, revealing only her clean curves. Even her eyelashes, which were as fine as a crow's feather, couldn't be seen. It had to be said that the hood had a certain concealment effect, mainly because it suppressed the color of her hair. Qin Mo was still wearing his well-ironed police uniform, which didn't stand out in such a setting since the people around were all police officers. Besides, no one would think of Supreme Alliance's captain as a police officer. Hence, when they saw him, their attention was slightly diverted. Bojio took a step towards Qin Mo, trying her best to reduce her presence. Her silver hair was handsome, but it was easy to expose her identity. Qin Mo seemed to understand the youngster's intentions. He reached out and pressed on the man's head, pulling him towards him before turning to Director Huang. "At this time, the plane should be boarding. Based on the time he left, there are only 3 available flights. He should have passed the security checkpoint by now." "That isn't possible." If he had passed the security checkpoint, we would definitely be able to tell. Be it the airport staff or our colleagues, they didn't find anyone similar to him. The two Interpol officers were anxious. With his words, they wanted to take action because deep down, they agreed with Qin Mo's point of view. According to the standards of an international criminal, there was a possibility of a certain level of disguise. Someone who was able to create a case like the maiden's sacrifice definitely wasn't simple. It was highly possible that the criminal had boarded one of the planes. If they followed the route provided by the profiler, their guess was the highest possibility. They had to board the plane immediately and arrest the suspect. Otherwise, once they alighted from the plane and entered America, many things would be out of their control. Hence, no matter what, they had to start the arrest, even if they had to use their identity as Interpol officers. Of course, Qin Mo knew what they were thinking. His tone was calm. This is China and the people on the plane are all Chinese. If the criminal has boarded the plane, all the passengers on the plane might become hostages. According to international practice, you have the right to ask for our cooperation, but we, China, still have the initiative. Hearing this, the two Interpol officers were taken aback. They hadn't expected that before they could open their mouths, their words would be stuffed back into their throats. The reason that was at the tip of their tongues was forcefully swallowed back into their throats. Qin Mo was indeed referring to international rules. How did he know about international rules? Director Huang listened by the side. You mean the criminal is already on the plane? Based on his understanding of the aloof youngster, he wouldn't have said that if it wasn't the case. Qin Mo glanced at the time, his voice still calm. There is a 90% chance he is on the plane. Go ask which plane is preparing to depart. With that, Qin Mo turned his head and looked at the youngster beside him. The youngster's hands were stuffed into her long jacket, the hooded top covering most of her face. It wasn't clear what she was looking at. She was staring at a spot like a curious little kid. In that instant, Qin Mo seemed to have recalled something. It was a blurry feeling. The miniature version of a certain someone seemed to have been like this before, staring at a spot with her eyes wide open, her little face smeared with paint. It was very, very familiar. Here it comes again. Qin Mo furrowed his brows as though he was coming back to reality. He paused for a moment before walking towards the youngster. What are you looking at? Bojiu lifted her chin, gesturing for Qin Mo to look at the group of people going through the security check. The distinguishing feature of the group was that everyone was wearing the same t-shirt. Some of them were wearing a hat while others were not. I think we can start with these people. If they want to avoid being tracked and board the plane safely, they either have to disguise themselves as staff or a member of the group. I'm more inclined to the latter. If it's the former, it's impossible for that person to disguise himself as a stewardess. Someone as handsome as Brother Imo and I would be more likely. She didn't forget to praise herself for her analysis. Only a certain someone would do such a thing. But Qin Mo lifted his lips, his left hand pressing down on the youngster's head. I agree with you. With that, he turned towards the Special Forces officer beside him. According to your records, which of the three planes has a tour group? Reporting young Master Qin, there are two, both of them are from American Airlines. Which of the two planes takes off first? Director Huang, go and negotiate with them, try to get half an hour to an hour's time. Qin Mo said this because he knew the other party had agreed to the same amount as well. Director Huang wasn't confident. This isn't a domestic airline, it's an international route and isn't a local airline. Even the airline is from America, I'm afraid they wouldn't be willing to give up so much time. Qin Mo asked for the name of the Special Forces airline before he dialed a number from his contact list. It was an international call. Very quickly, a deep voice came from the other end. It was spoken in authentic English. Qin, what is it? Is there a business collaboration? If it's a project from your family, we won't reject anyone no matter how much. William, I'm not looking for you to discuss a project. One of your company's planes has met with some problems in our country. I would like you to help me get an hour to delay the departure by half an hour to an hour. William smiled. What's so important? Are you going to chase after an escaped girl? That's how it is on the television. An hour is too long, I can get them to delay by half an hour. All right. I'll make the arrangements now, treat it as me returning the favor. Qin Mo hung up, turning towards the Special Forces and Director Huang. The plane will be delayed by half an hour, we need someone who is good at identifying disguises. I can't go up, the other party might recognize me and be wary of me. Is there anyone who is good at that? The Special Forces were indeed good at identifying disguises, but they weren't that good. Bojiu glanced over, no one raised their hands. Brother Imo, what do you think of me? The youngster smiled devilishly, her words sharp. Everyone on the plane has become his hostage. If he knows how to fly, once he notices something amiss in the cabin, he would take action. Hence, it wouldn't be suitable for him to wear a police uniform. I'm the only one he doesn't know. Even if he sees me, he would only treat me as a passenger and wouldn't have any resistance. Time trickled by. At this moment in the cabin, the tall and slender man seated by the window was starting to get impatient, getting more and more impatient at times like this. Everything was over, but the plane still hadn't taken off. The tall and slender man reached for the light, calling the air stewardess over. The air stewardess's smile was perfect. Sir, do you need a blanket? Or is there anything else you need? No, it's just 10 minutes before the plane takes off. The tall and slender man couldn't sit still, asking the air stewardess to check her watch. Why isn't the cabin door closed yet? The stewardess lowered her body again. I'm sorry, sir. Our plane has encountered some procedural irregularities. In addition, there are still passengers who haven't come in yet. We're in the midst of final adjustments. Please forgive us for the inconvenience. Procedural inconveniences. The tall and slender man repeated, arching a brow. He decided to wait for another 10 minutes. If the plane wasn't closing up after 10 minutes, it would be time for him to consider his next move. Based on the current situation, the old couple beside him were the best hostages. Their ability to resist was one thing, and the other was that they didn't have any powerful weapons on them. If he had a weapon, he wouldn't be able to get away with it. Therefore, holding one of the old couple hostage wouldn't just be within his control, it would also allow him to kill 10 police officers. However, he still had to wait and see. After all, if he held a hostage here, it would mean that his situation wouldn't be as perfect as it seemed. He still had to cooperate with the Chinese police. He was probably overthinking. The other party couldn't possibly know that he had already boarded the plane. They must still be checking him at the security checkpoint and boarding gate, the tall and slender man thought and looked towards the cabin door. Indeed, there were still people who hadn't boarded. What the air stewardess had said was probably true. The delay was probably due to the system adjustment. There was no problem in the cabin. He could wait a little longer. If the special forces were to enter, he wouldn't wait for them to recognize him. Once he saw them, he would take action immediately. The 10 minutes passed extremely slowly for the tall and slender man. When the 8 minutes were up, he looked at his watch again. It wasn't just him, the others were also asking the air stewardess for the reason. However, the air stewardess gave the same explanation. No one noticed that at this moment, a youngster appeared at the cabin door. The youngster lowered his eyes and only his chin could be seen. His face was covered, but from this angle, he gave off an unruly vibe. The hood covered the youngster's hair color, making him look mysterious. When the air stewardess said welcome aboard, she was slightly stunned, thinking that the youngster was a celebrity. Chapter 948. As the last passenger to board the plane, Bojio didn't keep a low profile. Instead, it suited her image as a hedonistic young master. When she had been alone, she had been rather unrestrained. But she wasn't sure if it was because of her childhood memories, but the moment she was in front of the Almighty, she wanted to show her best side. In order to conquer her little sweetheart, she had to be mindful of her image. International flights were usually large passenger planes. As she walked from the beginning to the end, Bojio's gaze locked onto the group of tourists wearing the same top. She only had 5 minutes left. After 5 minutes, the cabin door would close and the plane would take off. She had to confirm who the culprit was within 5 minutes, and she couldn't make a mistake. If she did, there would be more trouble. Disguise was one of Bojio's specialties. She held a small leather suitcase in one hand and a boarding pass in the other. In fact, it was just a piece of blank paper that was cut out at the last minute. But it was this piece of paper that she looked at as if she was looking for her seat. Because of this, her gaze could naturally fall on every seat, and she wouldn't be suspected. The youngster walked from the front of the plane to the back of the airport casually. But in reality, she was continuously collecting and analyzing information. Her brain worked quickly. It was obvious that the age group of the tourists was on the older side. And the person they were looking for was between 23 to 27 years old. Of course, she didn't rule out the possibility of him disguising himself as an old or middle-aged man. Age could be changed through appearance, but the information revealed by the skin on the fingers and neck wouldn't change. And that person's figure. When people reached old age, they would naturally shorten their bodies. If they were tall, they would have a tendency to stoop. The elderly in this group didn't meet the standard height. That left the middle-aged man. Bojio narrowed her eyes. Under normal circumstances, if it were her, she would also dress up as a middle-aged man. She could disguise herself as an old man for a short period of time, but the flight would take a long time. It would be easy to be noticed. It wasn't easy to alight from the plane, and they had to enter the country from America. Hence, the target was shortened to 5 regardless of gender. But the culprit was a man. She couldn't rule out the possibility of him being a woman. First, she had to see if the middle-aged woman was really a woman. Many people looked at the Adam's apple when judging a man or woman, because sometimes some men's Adam's apple wasn't obvious. The woman also had a bulge on her neck, but it wasn't an Adam's apple. To differentiate between men and women, one had to look at their bone structure and figure. As someone who often disguised as a man, Bojio was very experienced. Hence, she never wore short sleeves. This was the only way she could fool the Almighty. Fortunately, the two at the airport were both wearing skirts. From the joints of the arms and some of the forms, the waist and legs collapsed. Women of this age had all given birth before, so one could definitely tell the difference in their pelvis. When Bojio glanced over, she thought that everything was normal. There were only 3 of them left. What made her uncertain were the 2 middle-aged men sitting beside the 2 old men. Whether it was the state of the skin or the body shape, it was impossible to tell who the problem was. This was beyond her ability to discern. Chapter 949. The stewardess's voice rang out once more, signaling for the passengers to return to their seats. She had to find the culprit before the cabin door closed. Bojio had to drag the culprit down before the plane took off. Otherwise, what would happen to the National League? Once the plane took off, it would take more than a day for them to return. Was it the one on the left or the one on the right? Bojio pondered as she walked forward. She paused for a second. In that second, there was only one thought in her mind. If it was the Almighty, how would he differentiate? Actions were controlled by the person. Words and appearances could be deceiving. But his actions and micro-expressions were subconscious. This was when she had been very young. Her little canine pet had told her about it. At that time, she had been obsessed with dismantling keyboards and climbing walls. He had been the only one who had been leaning against the headboard like a little prince, dressed in pure white pajamas, reading a book that she couldn't understand. It had been like a bedtime story reading to her. From time to time, he would pull himself away from the book, glancing at her sleepy eyes. Stupid. He wouldn't forget to pat her when he said those words. When she had been young, he had taught her half of the things she knew. Sometimes humans were mysterious. The influence between them seemed to have been predestined from the start. Hence, when Bojio walked forward again, her dark gaze landed on their expressions and actions. Both of them were anxious. After all, everyone wanted to know when the plane would take off. However, after one of them raised his hand to look at the time, he began to play with his phone again as if he was chatting. The other one turned towards Bojio, his gaze making it seem as though he had to be wary of anyone who entered. Bojio didn't avoid his gaze. Instead, she walked towards him with her boarding pass, just like an ordinary person looking for her seat. She walked forward with her small luggage, glancing at the seat number from time to time. Seeing this, the tall and slender man shifted his gaze back to his watch. After all, in his eyes, a high school student posed no threat at all. Moreover, the last person who came up was carrying a suitcase. If they were really here to capture him, they wouldn't take anything with them. The tall and slender man thought of the usual Interpol methods. But he wasn't aware of it. The young man in front of him was most familiar with how criminals thought. If she was the one escaping, she would also pay attention to the last person to enter the plane, and she would also observe who didn't take their luggage. Therefore, before entering the plane, the first thing she did was to grab a small suitcase. There was nothing in the suitcase, but she dragged it along to complete a layer of disguise. Bojio placed the suitcase down. She seemed to have found her position, but she wasn't sure. She glanced back and forth. At this moment, the tall and slender man was even less concerned. Listening to the countdown of the last minute, he flipped open the newspaper and was about to enjoy the moment of takeoff. The young man bent down, his silver hair faintly peeking out where his eyes were. The side of his face was as fair as jade, clean and handsome. "Sir, you seem to be sitting in the wrong seat. F12D, is this the right seat?" Bojio handed the boarding pass over. The tall and slender put down the newspaper and said in a normal voice, "This is my seat. Your seat is behind me." "Really?" The youngster laughed, a sinister aura in her voice. "I don't think your seat should be here, it should be in prison." With that, the tall and slender man's expression changed. He held on to the old man beside him, wanting to use him as a hostage. But in that instant there was a loud crack. His wrists, which were holding onto the newspaper, were locked together. The young man's movements were extremely fast. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, he directly pressed his entire head onto the small table. There was a loud bang. The tall and slender man was still in a state of shock. That was when he realized that the youngster wasn't holding a boarding pass, it was a piece of white paper. The old man beside him was the first to react, exclaiming in shock. The air stewardesses were even more eager to rush over to them. But before they could move, a tall and slender figure appeared in front of the cabin door. A tall and slender figure appeared in front of the cabin door. It was Chinemo. He had been in the tunnel all along, waiting for this sound. No matter who went in, he could remain calm and unhurried. But when it was that guy, Chinemo had to admit that he had been slightly worried. He had been worried that there might be something he hadn't predicted. He had been worried that the criminal might have a weapon. But from the looks of it, the operation was going smoothly. With such a person appearing in front of the cabin, the air stewardesses would definitely cover their mouths instinctively. Police case. Chinemo had already taken Director Huang's identification. He raised his right hand, releasing his aura. Everyone, please remain seated. Can I trouble the people in the middle to move aside so my men can bring him out? With such a sudden turn of events, everyone's first reaction would be to stand up and watch. But after Chinemo finished speaking, 6 to 7 special police officers appeared behind him. No one dared to move. The old couple who were closest to Bojio were in a state of shock. Bojio seemed to have noticed them. After knocking them out, she lifted them up forcefully. She didn't stay any longer. The tall and slender man was held down by 2 special police officers as he walked towards the cabin entrance. When he caught sight of Chinemo, his dazed mind snapped back to reality. He turned around abruptly and looked at the young man from before. Silver hair, black eyes, and an eye-catching face. He was supposed to be their next target, the young master of the Fu family who was closest to Chinemo. But their information hadn't mentioned him. Not only did he know how to disguise himself, he was also skilled. Inexplicably, a chill ran down the tall and slender man's spine. How much exactly did they know about the youngster who was always by Chinmo's side? According to the information, the youngster didn't just know how to play games, he seemed to have some knowledge of computers as well. It had been countless times that their plans had been forced to stop because of a single person's cyber attack. The other party had even changed their bomb sequence without them knowing. They hadn't even been able to find out the other party's identity. But now, the tall and slender man had a terrifying thought. If the person who had been disrupting their plans was this youngster, then the consequences? The tall and slender man didn't dare to continue the thought. His face was already covered by a black cloth. The moment the cabin door closed, Chinemo reached out and pulled Bojio into his embrace. Chinemo reached out and pulled Bojio into his arms, acting as though there was no one else around. The Interpol officers glanced at each other, seeing the shock in each other's eyes. They hadn't expected them to have such a relationship other than being battle partners. The 2 Interpol officers were desperate for information. Once they caught the tall and slender man, they would join the interrogation. Chinemo didn't follow them because he knew they wouldn't speak so easily. Before leaving the airport, Chinemo instructed Director Huang, check the accounts under his various identities. Who are their financial transactions with? Who are the most frequent financial transactions? Director Huang was smart. You're saying that the one he has the most frequent contact with is his superior? No. Chinemo glanced at Director Huang, his voice calm. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be any financial dealings within an organization. The ones that do are their partners, for example, the traitor in the crime squad. The moment the word traitor was mentioned, Director Huang's expression turned solemn. I understand. Bojio sat at the front passenger seat, watching as Director Huang's figure grew smaller. She turned over. Little Huang really knows? If there really are financial dealings, it must be a huge sum. He would be able to know every single operation, and every single one of them is a crucial one. Otherwise, the news wouldn't have been leaked so quickly. This person could even make use of the new criminal psychologist to take away your authority. His position shouldn't be low. Indeed, it isn't low. At the very least, it would be someone of the same rank or above. Chinemo made use of the red light to light a cigarette. He held it with one hand, his features sharp. He knows that it's just a few people. He knows about the politics of the government. Leaking information isn't something a single person can do. If the investigation starts, All the related personnel will be held accountable. Qin Mo took advantage of the time to wait for the traffic light to turn red. Behind every major case there would be corruption. That was the reality in every country. As a hacker, Bojiu knew it better than anyone else. But I didn't know high schoolers these days would know so much. The Almighty's casual comment made Bojiu's heart flutter. She broke into a smile. There are so many movies and dramas, it's easy to understand. Corruption starts from the beginning, that's why there's an oversight. You know me, I love police dramas. Is that so? Qin Mo glanced at the youngster. I remember your bookshelf only has novels like Overbearing CO Falls in Love with Me, there aren't any police dramas. Of course she wouldn't read police dramas since the robbers would always be caught. Bojiu didn't want to be caught. Just as she was thinking about how to reply without being discovered, a voice suddenly rang beside her ear. It seems like the things placed in the Fu family's house aren't what you like, it's what you liked in the past. Qin Mo's voice was calm. Sometimes I really wonder if you're that young Master Fu. In that instant, the air in the car seemed to have frozen. The two men's eyes met. One was extremely deep. The other was so dark that it was translucent. Neither of them shifted their gazes away. Bojiu's heart seemed to be nailed to the ground, beating slowly. Until the phone rang, Bojiu broke into a faint smile. If I'm not me, who else can I be? Let's pick up the call. With that, Bojiu tilted her head, placing the phone beside her ear. Regardless of who was calling, Bojiu was grateful. The moment the call went through, a voice came through. Little Spade, where are you? I'm at your door, hurry over. Chapter 950. He didn't wait for her to speak before hanging up. Bojiu reached for her phone. Qin Mo arched a brow. Lin Feng? Image. Qin Mo chuckled, but there wasn't much warmth in his eyes. Do you really intend to sleep there? From your tone it sounds like it. Bojiu watched the almighty sculpted face, feeling an inexplicable sense of misfortune. Speaking of misfortune, Lin Feng really fit the description. Originally, he had left the house valiantly and slammed the door loudly, intending to stay in a hotel for 2 days. It's not like he doesn't have money, right? Who knew that he wouldn't have brought his wallet when he left the house? If he had money he could take a taxi since he could pay with his phone. But he needed an identification card to stay in a hotel. He couldn't leave in the day and return at night. How could that be considered running away from home? It would be like a child playing house. But for him to return to get his identification card, it would be too embarrassing. Yunhu must be mocking him now. How could he be so hesitant to leave home? All the more reason why he couldn't return. He would definitely find fault with him. Even if he didn't find fault with him, he would definitely take a look at him. Not to mention the things written in the text. It was too frightening. He actually wanted to use those techniques on him. *CK, did he really think he was a pushover? That was why he had to wander outside. Thinking of this, Lin Feng kicked the wall heavily. The kick was so painful that his entire body arched. *CK. This was the scene that Qin Mo and Bojiu saw when they drove back. Honestly, only a naive person would kick a wall when they couldn't get over it. Lin Feng's existence was the perfect definition of that word. Bojiu rolled down the car window. She leaned against the window and whistled. After hearing the whistle, Lin Feng's first reaction was to look behind him. He saw the silver-haired youngster sitting in the car, looking at him with a leisurely smile on his lips. This posture is really handsome. That's right. Lin Feng was about to say more when he realized that the car in front of him was familiar. When he took a closer look, he saw a noble and aloof face. All of a sudden, Lin Feng swallowed the words he wanted to say. *CK, why didn't Little Spade tell him that Captain was here too? Lin Feng knew how to restrain himself in front of Qin Mo. For example, he didn't place his arm around Little Spade's body like he usually did. Instead, when they reached the living room he started to complain. Anyway, I don't plan to go back. Arrange a room for me. Bojiu glanced at Lin Feng, thinking that he wouldn't be able to win against Almighty Yun at his level. He hadn't considered the possibility of him finding his way over. You don't know how miserable I've been lately. Lin Feng hugged the cushion on the sofa. He glanced up at the ceiling before turning to Bojiu. I'm a grown man and I still have to guard against my brother taking advantage of me. In the past we could still talk about the weather and girls. When the room gets hot we could remove our shirts whenever we wanted. We could play games or watch porn together. Now I have to wrap myself up tightly at home. Let's not talk about putting our arms around each other's shoulders. If we were to get any closer, I would lose my integrity. Motherf asterisk cur, of all the things that guy could be thinking about, he just had to think about my chrysanthemum. Bojo didn't say a word. She just smiled. Little submissive Lin looked rather pitiful. Hey little spade, do you have beer? Lin Feng didn't feel like he was suffering at all. He was the one attacking, wasn't he? Bojo didn't want to laugh too much. She held her chin and arched a brow lazily. Yes, why? Give me a can first, I'm suffocating. Lin Feng placed the cushion at the side, his eyes bright. Chinamo walked over and tossed a can of beer to Lin Feng. His tone was calm. What? He doesn't even allow you to drink. That's not it. Without a second thought, Lin Feng pulled open the can of beer, tilted his head back and drank a mouthful. I'm afraid I'll drink too much and give Yunhu another chance. He's not easy to deal with, so I have to stay sober. Chinamo glanced at him, replying slowly, I see. Think about it, aren't I pitiful? I love drinking and eating meat skewers, but I'm not allowed to drink Budweiser. It's killing me, Lin Feng said, taking another sip. Chinamo sat there, tossing another can of beer to him. Indeed, do you need someone to prepare some food to go with the alcohol? Lin Feng had never seen his captain so caring. Was it because of Little Spade? TSK. That was why people in love. It was unbelievable. But such a huge change in his captain was rather frightening. Lin Feng caressed his arm. It wasn't much, he just wanted to eat and drink to his heart's content. Everything else wasn't important to him. Qin Xiaodong stood at the side, confused. That wasn't it. What exactly did he hear? Almighty Yun had been thinking about Almighty Lin and he was so blatant about it. In the past, he had always thought that the rumors on the internet were lies. After all, he knew that when people interacted with their brothers, they would naturally put their arms around each other's shoulders. He didn't understand what the girls were screaming about. Weren't Almighty Yun and Almighty Lin normal? Why did they suddenly become abnormal? No, that wasn't right. Why were there suddenly gay men around him? Young Master was gay, Almighty Qin had been turned gay by his young master, and now Almighty Lin and Almighty Yun were at such a stage. It could be said that as a straight man he was under a lot of pressure when there were gays around him. It was better to call Madam and ask her to continue shopping with Movie Queen in. It was too dangerous at home. Qin Xiaodong was afraid that he Honghua wouldn't be able to take it. It was fine that young master was gay, but there were so many of his kind around him. After placing the dishes on the table, Qin Xiaodong went to do his own things. Before he left, he glanced at the empty beer cans at the side. There were quite a lot of them. Bojo was looking at the food as well. As she ate, she arched a brow. As expected, someone was going to be in trouble. Lin Feng was a naive boy. He didn't even realize that the Almighty was trying to force him to drink. This person. Bojo didn't know what to say. At this moment, Lin Feng bolted upright. His body was shaking and his words weren't clear. No, I have to make a phone call and show off to that guy. Bojo shook his glass. It was empty. She glanced at the bottle of Mao Tai the Almighty had pushed over. Needless to say, Lin Feng definitely drank too much. What are you showing off for? Bojo thought to herself. Lin Feng tossed his phone onto the table before picking it up. He dialed a string of numbers. Showing off that I successfully ran away from home. Bojo. What's there to show off? At this moment, Lin Feng's phone was connected. It was on speaker mode. The voice on the other end was familiar and steady, but there was a tinge of anxiousness. Where are you? I burp, why should I tell you? Lin Feng burped, looking rather arrogant. To Bojo he was asking for trouble. Yunhu's fingers stilled. You drank? I didn't just drink, I ate meat too. That's right. I even saw. Lin Feng wanted to say that he saw a girl, but after scanning the surroundings, there wasn't a single girl. He changed his words. I even saw a hunk. Yunhu narrowed his eyes, his tone turning cold. Which hunk? A hunk with silver hair. Lin Feng was drunk, acting rather stupid. Don't bother about that. I'm just telling you I won't be going back today. You can play with yourself. Yunhu arched a brow. A hunk with silver hair? Why? Lin Feng lifted his chin proudly. Can't I have silver hair? I'm more handsome than you anyway. Yunhu's voice was unhurried, as though he had changed into another person. There was even a hint of a smile in his voice. Why not? Have fun. Then Yunhu ended the call. Lin Feng, who was hung up on, was a little confused. She turned towards Bojo. What does he mean by that? Does he not believe that I'm with a hunk? Bojo held her forehead. He didn't want to talk nonsense with you anymore and was coming to fetch you. Who else do you know besides me, the silver-haired hunk? Bojo wouldn't say that out loud. Lin Feng, the naive fool, had no chance of being saved. At this stage, Qin Imo shook the wineglass in his hand. Even Qin Imo shook the wineglass in his hand, his voice indifferent. It seems like I saved a phone call. That was right. The Almighty had wanted to get Lin Feng drunk because he had a plan. But who would have expected Lin Feng to be so careless? What was this? Did he pack himself up and send it to someone else's mouth to eat? Student Lin Feng, who was drunk, didn't realize this problem and insisted on having a heart-to-heart talk with Bojio. Tell me, isn't he too much? I still don't have a proper girlfriend and every girl that tries to get close to me is because of him. I don't trust women anymore. F***ck. You want a girlfriend? Bojio had always believed that relationships shouldn't be forced. If Lin Feng really wanted a girlfriend, she had to make him stay. Lin Feng shook his head. That isn't the main point. If that isn't the main point, then what is? Bojio arched a brow. Lin Feng took another sip of beer, his expression serious. Do I look like a bottom? Aren't those texts supposed to put me on the top? So you're conflicted about the top. Bojio's lips twitched. Lin Feng waved his hands. That's not it, I can't explain it clearly. I just don't like being controlled. I don't care when he goes out to eat with other girls. Bojio. Was this the time to complain? Senior Lin, you're getting more and more gay. Where's the beer? Lin Feng's beautiful eyes narrowed. Give me another bottle, I have to get drunk with Little Spade today. Little Spade, you can tell me what you are unhappy with, Captain. Don't worry, I will never tell Captain. It will be a secret between us forever. Lin Feng's beautiful eyes narrowed. Fine. He was so drunk that he didn't even know the Almighty was there. Bojio was really worried about a certain someone tonight. To be honest, I really didn't think that Captain would actually be pursued by you. I always thought that the girl he kissed at the ball was his true love. Lin Feng shook his head. Captain is too fickle. When Qin Imo heard this, he raised his eyebrows slowly and smiled. There was an obvious coldness at the corners of his lips. If you get caught by Jianghu tonight, will you die a horrible death? How is that possible? Lin Feng stuttered. That guy must have never expected me to be here. He must be thinking I'm having a date at some hotel. Is that so? Qin Imo lifted the corners of his lips. Bojio watched as the Almighty sent a message to Almighty Yun. Bring him back. The reply came swiftly. I'm on my way, I'll be there soon. Indeed, from Lin Feng's words, Almighty Yun already knew where he was. But Lin Feng didn't feel any sense of danger, he continued to burp. Little Spade, who do you think that girl is? All right. Tell me honestly, what kind of clothes were you wearing that day? Why didn't we find you? Guess. Bojio leaned back lazily. Lin Feng shook his head. It must have been ugly, I know how it feels. Dressing up as a girl is going to kill straight guys like us. Burp, that's not right, you aren't straight, you are gay. Wait a minute, stop swaying, let me see for myself. Why does it look so familiar? I remember now, that girl had the same eyes that day. Bojio frowned, wondering if she had been recognized. She didn't want to be recognized. Her head hurt. Even Qin Imo turned to look at Lin Feng when he heard this. It was obvious that Lin Feng was still deep in thought, but only he knew what he was thinking. Bojio was about to speak. Lin Feng slapped his forehead. Little Spade, don't tell me you have a younger sister that you haven't introduced to us. Bojio. What a naive mind, always so curious. Your younger sister is really pretty. Lin Feng was lost in his own imagination. Did Captain agree because you look similar to your younger sister? Sigh. It's another story about a substitute. Little Spade, you're really pitiful. Bojio was speechless. Why would a straight guy like you want to read a substitute story? Who said a straight guy can't read a substitute story? Lin Feng shouted again. I like it. When Qin Imo heard this, he lost his patience. He sent a few more words. Where are you? Very quickly, 2 words appeared on the screen. Entrance. After Qin Imo finished reading, he stood up without a change in expression. Lin Feng hooked his arm around Bojio's shoulders, speaking the truth between brothers. Brother, let me tell you, there aren't any good men. If Captain treats you as a substitute, you have to kick him out. I will fight with you and kick Wuxia out. I think you should turn to take a look before you say that. Bojio held her chin, reminding him calmly. Chapter 951. The moment Lin Feng said that. In an instant, the air around the newcomer became colder. Jianghu didn't look happy either. Bojio felt that this person was hopeless, he couldn't even recognize a wolf. It would be strange if he wasn't taken away. Jianghu glanced over at him. Lin Feng was still chuckling. Come handsome, sit down and have a drink. This skill of being familiar with others was really inviting a wolf into the house. Bojio watched as Lin Feng drank another can of beer. Yunhu was sitting beside him. He touched his lips subconsciously, but he didn't even press his lips. Lin Feng was straightforward, slapping his tongue. Handsome, have we met before? With that, Lin Feng frowned again, leaning towards Bojio seriously. He lowered his voice. Little Spade, don't you think this guy looks like someone? Bojio replied lazily. A little. She sat back and watched as Lin Feng courted his own death. Burp. Wait a minute, let me think. Lin Feng shook his head, his expression solemn. It wasn't easy for him to make eye contact. His gaze wasn't as blurry as before, but when he met that chiseled and handsome face he froze. He pulled Bojio over, turning his head. F***CK. Why is he here? When did he come? How did he find us? This isn't logical. Bojio took out her phone, smiling faintly as she pressed the record button, gesturing for him to listen carefully. Lin Feng was still in a daze, swaying back and forth before he heard the voice. Where are you? I burp, why should I tell you? You drank? I didn't just drink, I ate meat too. That's right. I saw a hunk. Which hunk? A silver-haired hunk, you don't have to care about this. I'm telling you, I'm not going back today, you can play with yourself. A silver-haired hunk? What? Can't he have silver hair? He's more handsome than you anyway. There's nothing wrong with that, have fun. Do. After listening to this recording, Lin Feng's IQ was finally restored to its previous level. Now that he knew the truth, he was on the verge of tears. He wished he could find a hole to crawl into and bury himself alive. He was the one who said that Yunhu would find his way here. From the moment he entered, Yunhu hadn't said a word. Instead, he swept a glance at the empty wine cans on the ground. There were about a dozen of them. It seemed like he hadn't been drinking recently and had been craving for so much. This made it easier for him to take her away. Who gave you the wine? Yunhu asked. Lin Feng felt that he had to put up a front and let out a drunken burp. Captain gave it to me. You want to pick a fight with the captain? Bojio facepalmed again. Yet Yunhu only glanced at him. He sat beside that person, his expression unchanged, but his words were routine. I know, you didn't dare to drink in front of me, but you dared to after coming out. Who said I didn't dare to? Lin Feng opened another can of wine, drinking in a heroic manner. In less than 2 cans, his eyes started to blur again. He probably couldn't recognize anyone, otherwise he wouldn't be looking at Chinamo. Little Spade, come, let's have a pajama party. With that, he leaned towards Chinamo. Chinamo blocked him with his left hand, his eyes fixed on Yunhu. Aren't you going to take him away? Yunhu pulled Lin Feng back. You want to have a pajama party? Burp, yes. Lin Feng stood up shakily. Yunhu pulled him towards the door. Let's go home, I'll play with you. Lin Feng didn't even know how Yunhu had shoved him into the car. He was still dizzy. He looked sober, glancing up with a determined expression. I'm not going home. I'm still running away from home. Then, where do you want to go? Yunhu glanced at the road ahead. Lin Feng glanced outside, burping again. To the hotel? No, I can't go to the hotel. I didn't bring my identity card. If Yunhu finds out, he will definitely mock me. Is that so? Yunhu watched a certain someone in a daze. This fellow was still as careless as before, forgetting his wallet when he left home. Lin Feng replied, burping again. After a while he asked, why does this road look so familiar? The roads are all the same, of course it looks familiar. Yunhu continued to turn the steering wheel. Lin Feng narrowed his eyes, looking extremely heroic. You're right, where are we going now? To my house. Yunhu's voice was still as calm as before. Don't you want to have a pajama party? Lin Feng nodded. Yes, a pajama party. With that, he frowned. Why does this road look so familiar? I remember now, this is the road to my house. Did he recognize him? At a red light, Yunhu stopped the car, turning his head, meeting a certain someone's hazy eyes. Lin Feng didn't realize how much his face could hurt the people who liked him. Moreover, when he was drunk, it made people want to go over and kiss him. I got it. Lin Feng shook himself, trying to sit up straight. Your house and mine are in the same direction. Handsome, we are really fated. Indeed. Yunhu restarted the car, thinking that he shouldn't have placed too much hope on a certain someone's intelligence. Lin Feng felt a little high. I burp, we have to have another drink. It's fated? Sure. Yunhu drove the car into the courtyard. Lin Feng looked around. Military Base 1 burp, it seems real. When did such a small area appear beside our house? Why didn't I know about it? Yun, who changed the gear, stopped the car and helped Lin Feng down. No, that's not right, I'm still running away from home. This is military base 1, I want to go that way. Lin Feng pointed in the direction of the main entrance. Yun, who helped him forward 3 steps. This is the right way. Do you think I can't tell the direction when I'm drunk? Lin Feng shook his head, trying to sober himself up. I'm telling you, I can still drink another 30 bottles. Let's go back to the room, I'll drink with you, Yun, who said faintly, carrying Lin Feng up. The two of them even had their auras entangled together. Even though there were other cars in the courtyard, the headlights couldn't reach them. It was as if the two of them were in another small world. No one would disturb them. The night sky darkened. Fu family's villa. At this moment, Bo Jiao felt that it wasn't a good thing that the naive Lin Feng had left. With Lin Feng around, she would at least be safe. But now she wasn't so sure. The Almighty's unique minty tobacco scent wafted through the air. Is there something you forgot to do? What? Bo Jiao arched a brow. Help me bathe. Qin Mo inched closer, so close that Bo Jiao stilled. She tilted her head to look into his deep eyes. Her thighs were separated by a layer of cloth, the temperature rising. Her breath became his scent, as though the almighty scent was infecting her body. Before Bo Jiao could open her mouth, her words were cut off by a kiss. First it was a light lick. Once his handsome face was so close, it was easy to lose her ability to think. Qin Mo used this force to carry her up and sit on the sofa. His tongue pushed open her lips and entered her mouth, their tongues intertwining. He didn't give her any chance to regret. Bo Jiao couldn't resist his kiss. The numbness at the tip of her tongue and the melting water kneading made it hard for Bo Jiao to breathe. Until the Almighty released her. Her mind was blank for a few seconds. It was the days after the pleasure. The numbness spread from her tailbone to her entire body as though she had been electrocuted. Her heartbeat was extremely strong. Not to mention the position between her and the Almighty. She was sitting on the Almighty's lap. He could even feel something boiling hot pressing against him. Under such circumstances, she couldn't agree to the bathing. Bo Jiao stood up, her ears flushed. I'll look for Xiaodong, he'll help you bathe. Of course, Qin Mo wouldn't allow Qin Xiaodong to touch him. He glanced at Bo Jiao before glancing at the time, his voice hoarse. Help me bathe after the National League. You can bathe yourself. Qin Mo said the last few words slowly and deeply. Bo Jiao thought, I might not be here after the National League, but she didn't say it out loud. To her, the National League was a dividing line. After they won the National League, the Fu family would be back and everything would be in He Honghua's hands again. When that happened, it would be time for her to leave. She would use her identity to pursue the criminal. She activated the USB. This meant that she would have to return to the darkness. Qin Mo could tell that she wasn't paying attention. He didn't like her expression at this moment. It was as though she didn't care. She could withdraw at any time and end it at any time. Their relationship wasn't the kind that could end at any time. If she couldn't realize this, he would make her realize it. Bo Jiao thought she was safe. Unexpectedly, the moment she entered the room, she was about to bring a pillow to the guest room. The Almighty pushed her against the wall and gave her another round of powerless kisses. Bo Jiao couldn't take it. Her legs were numb and soft. When she regained her senses, she was carried onto the bed. Bo Jiao's bed was a single bed, much narrower than a double bed. This bed was convenient for Qin Mo to a certain extent. The two of them were very close. That handsome face that made her heart race was right in front of her eyes. Qin Mo lowered his lids to look at the person in his arms. Even the scorching breath could stir up one's spirit. Since you don't want to help me, I can help you. With that, Qin Mo carried her again and kicked the bathroom door open. When the shower started, both of their clothes were wet. It was cold water and wasn't warm yet. When it splashed on their bodies, it made them shudder. Qin Mo skillfully removed the cloth strips. As the cloth fell off, the water started to heat up. Everything was different. Bo Jiao was wearing a black t-shirt. Now that it was wet, it was sticking to her body. Qin Mo's eyes darkened at the sight of her curvaceous figure. Without any hesitation, he carried her up and placed her on the counter. His gaze deepened. Qin Mo watched as the clear water droplets slid down the youngster's clean and devilish cheeks. Her wet silver hair fell down and stuck to the side of her ears. The color of her lips was even more alluring. The outline of her waist was smooth and supple. Under the water vapor there was a bewitching color. The water droplets continued to roll down, landing on the back of Qin Mo's hand. Such a scene was especially ambiguous. It was like a beautiful and oppressive dream, teasing one's heart to the point where it was no longer calm. Bojio went numb and wanted to push him away. But Qin Imo pressed her down, his warm breath hitting the back of her ears. He chuckled. Your breathing is messed up too. It seems like you want me to give you more. The water vapor gathered. Enveloped in the smoky water vapor, Bojio's black t-shirt was crumpled beyond recognition. Qin Imo pushed it to her heart. His thin lips landed, every kiss hot. Bojio trembled. A young lady's body couldn't withstand such teasing. She didn't have any defense against Qin Imo. The water droplets splashed down. Qin Imo didn't turn off the shower. When he stepped on her pants, he arched his waist and barged in. Bojio couldn't withstand that kind of speed. Everything was messed up. It was hot and numb. The water droplets splashed on her body. Her only support was him. And this time the force was unprecedentedly strong. He nibbled on her ear and pressed his chest against her back. She braced her hands against the wall as if to soften the impact of the blow. But when he stopped, there was hope that he could regain his previous strength. Qin Imo paused, moving closer to the youngster's face. His voice was low. Tell me, why do you want to leave? Bojio frowned slightly. Her snow-white skin was on full display. Especially when the cloth around her chest was undone, she really became a seductive demon. Even the corners of her eyes were tainted with a tenderness that made people want to destroy her. But the stubbornness of biting her lips made her even more irresistible. Qin Imo held her waist, coaxing her. Tell me, who did you learn your hacking skills from? Self-study. Bojio uttered the word, her voice trailing off. Her seductive waist trembled unconsciously. Qin Mo's eyes dimmed. Do you think I'll believe you? Bojio didn't want to continue this topic. She turned her face, smiling seductively. Brother Imo, don't you think it's a waste of time to ask such questions at this time? Brother Imo, are you out of energy? Out of energy? Qin Imo pressed her into his arms, his voice so deep that it was raspy. I'll show you now if I still have the strength. Chapter 952. When Bojio dashed out, her waist and legs were still affected. But after teasing the Almighty, she was still in a good mood. Even when she was eating breakfast, her lips were still in a smile. Qin Xiaodong arranged the things before heading upstairs and knocking on the guest room door. He wondered if Almighty Qin would have a bad temper when he woke up. Madame had passed the task of waking him up to him. He was really scared out of his wits. He knocked 3 times but no one answered. Qin Xiaodong pressed his ear against the door, about to say something. The door behind him opened. Almighty Qin walked out with one hand in his pocket. He seemed to have just showered. He glanced at him, his gaze slow. What's the matter? Qin Xiaodong stilled. He glanced at the guest room he had knocked on and then at the room Almighty Qin had come out from. His mouth was wide open enough to fit an egg. Almighty Qin had just come out from young master's room? At this hour? He had come out from young master's room. There was too much information. Qin Xiaodong could only hold it in. He couldn't say anything. Most importantly, he couldn't let Madame know. This time, young master was completely gay. He Honghua didn't know what was going on. She just felt that her Jiao was sitting there, her lips were a little pink and her eyes seemed to be open. After a night, she seemed to look much better. Her skin was still white, an indescribable change. Bojio bit on a youtiao. Her waist was slightly sore, but with He Honghua around, she couldn't rub it. Fortunately, a phone call came in, allowing her to change her posture. Bojio was delighted when she saw the caller. It was Lin Feng, that naive boy. Hello. The person sitting on the toilet wasn't wearing a shirt, only a pair of SpongeBob SquarePants boxers, exposing his ribs. When he heard the voice coming from the other side of the phone, he grabbed his hair, sounding extremely aggrieved. Little Spade, why didn't you stop Yunhu yesterday? How can you be such a brother? Bojio started to help Lin Feng recall. Last night, you were the one who thought Almighty Yun wasn't bad and insisted on having a drink with him. I never expected you to leave with him so obediently. I was so drunk that I didn't know it was him. Lin Feng was filled with regret. Bojio didn't miss the chance to listen to the live broadcast. What about now? Where are you? What's going on? At the mention of this, Lin Feng felt miserable. Didn't I drink too much last night? You're a man, so you should know that when a man drinks too much, he can't control himself. That's why Almighty Yun finally slept with you using the scenes mentioned in the novel, Bojio continued, going along with the flow. Lin Feng wanted to jump again. What do you mean he finally slept with me? I should be the one sleeping with him. Speaking up to this point, Lin Feng paused. It's not that exaggerated. You just helped me with something. Bo Jiao took a sip of water. What are you worried about? I'm AF asterisk king straight man. How can I take that? Lin Feng pulled at his hair for a while. Most importantly, I blacked out yesterday. I don't know if I did anything to him after that. He's still lying on the bed and seems to be in pain. If I really did something to him because of alcohol, my conscience wouldn't be able to bear it. Bo Jiao caught on to the main point. You're saying that you drank too much last night and accidentally slept with Almighty Yun? That's right. Lin Feng sighed deeply, concluding, if that really happened, I can't be responsible for him. Bo Jiao wanted to tell him that it wouldn't happen, that he was overestimating his abilities. From front to back, from left to right, he seemed to be the one on the receiving end. You were already so drunk, Almighty Yun should be the one sleeping with you. How could you sleep with Almighty Yun? But Bo Jiao wasn't going to expose him. What do you intend to do now? Bo Jiao asked a practical question. Lin Feng was still sitting on the toilet, his handsome face filled with sorrow. I'll think about it. He hung up. Lin Feng wanted to smoke to calm himself down. He felt that he had let that fellow down. Because he still had some memories from last night. That was strange. Why did he find that person so handsome? He probably knew that after the competition he would be leaving the country. He wanted to say something from the bottom of his heart. But for some reason as he spoke the feeling changed. It was probably because a man couldn't resist the temptation after drinking. Even now when he closed his eyes, Lin Feng could hear what the person was saying beside his ear. The scorching hot breath hit the back of his ear. The voice was very low and had a little husky sexiness to it. Lin Feng, you're hard? Lin Feng didn't want to recall what happened next. Why did he lose control when he was drunk? He could have taken advantage of anyone, but he had to take advantage of Jianghu. With that, Lin Feng glanced at himself. It's all your fault. Don't you know that no matter how good it is, you can't be gay? You brat. Just as Lin Feng was lecturing himself. Swoosh. The bathroom door was pulled open. Lin Feng braced himself, not daring to look up. Jianghu leaned against the door, his face handsome and calm. He glanced over at a certain someone who had been pulling his hair in the bathroom ever since he woke up. His voice was calm. How much longer are you going to nag at your little Lin Feng? Little Lin Feng. Lin Feng didn't want to comment on Jianghu's description. He was sad. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have run away from home yesterday. He had to maintain his dignity. Lin Feng coughed, feeling that he didn't have any dignity in his boxer shorts. He could only pretend to be calm. Leave first. Jianghu felt that his emotions weren't right. After yesterday's sweetness, he understood that he couldn't force him too much. He knew this better than anyone else. Lin Feng might look like that. In reality he was more straightforward than anyone else. Ever since he was young, he had been thinking about marrying a cute girl. He said that girls had to be doted on and that his wife couldn't be cold or hungry in the future. Hence, even cooking, which didn't fit his persona, was extremely good. Lin Feng had never known. When he heard those things he didn't know how his heart worked. He wanted to let him get what he wanted. After all, this guy deserved to be treated gently. But he was jealous from the bottom of his heart. He was jealous of the girl who would get him in the future. He was so jealous that he didn't dare to voice his thoughts. If it hadn't been for Little Spade, this guy might never have been enlightened. With a couple by his side he realized that he really liked him. It had never been brotherly love. Chapter 953. With that in mind, Jianghu's entire being became indescribably gloomy. His heart felt as though it had been stabbed. Regardless of how strong he appeared in front of that person when he sat like this, he still felt a sense of despair. Bang. Lin Feng had probably made up his mind. He rushed out of the washroom. Originally, he wanted to tell him in one go that he really couldn't be gay and that they could be brothers again. But when he saw that person sitting there with a pale side profile, he couldn't say the words that were at the tip of his tongue. After all, Jianghu really looked as though he had done something to him. He looked a little pitiful. He had never seen such an expression on his face before. Come to think of it, it made sense. Even if Jianghu was gay, he should be the one on top. He could just treat him as a straight man. It probably wouldn't be easy for him to accept being defiled by him. When Jianghu heard the commotion, he glanced over. He had already recovered his usual calm demeanor, that gaze emotionless. But Lin Feng felt that there was a lot of meaning behind that gaze. In addition, Jianghu's current position. He seemed to have been rubbing his waist since just now. Even though Lin Feng was a newbie, he was a newbie who had seen porn. Every person who had been F***ked probably looked like Jianghu now, his waist uncomfortable and different from usual. So last night, he really did something to Jianghu? Lin Feng inhaled deeply, looking at himself and then at Jianghu, his face solemn. Don't worry, I will take responsibility. Take responsibility? Jianghu was stunned by the sudden change. He didn't think that he had to take responsibility for helping him to masturbate, or did this guy misunderstand something again? Lin Feng sat down. His posture was a little chinibu. Luckily his face was handsome. Although I was so impulsive because I was drunk, what I did is what I did. I will take responsibility for you. However, you have to give me a process. After all, I'm straight. I really don't understand what you gays are thinking, but I still have to take responsibility. Did it? Jianghu grasped the crux of the problem. Lin Feng pointed at his waist. His face was a little red. Is that? Are you okay now? Do you need me to go down and buy some medicine? It should be your first time down there, right? Is it still painful? If it hurts, don't hold it in. Tell me. It seemed like this idiot had forgotten that he had sprained his waist last night when he was struggling to go home. Jianghu didn't know who had given him the wrong impression that he had slept with him. But Jianghu didn't intend to explain clearly. He didn't admit or deny it. Instead, his gaze deepened. To be honest, he still didn't understand the direction of a certain person's thoughts. When Lin Feng saw Jianghu turn his head away, he knew that Jianghu didn't want to talk to him. That's right, which man would still be in a good mood after being F***ked? If it was him. He had to beat him to death. Other than the fact that Wuxia had ignored him when they were young. Today was the first time he didn't speak at all. Lin Feng was a little flustered. He pondered for a moment and said, "Wait, I'll go make another call." "Did you go to the toilet?" Jianghu glanced up, his voice slow. "Dressed like this?" Lin Feng lowered his head. It was indeed inappropriate. He looked at the clothes on the ground. They were already wrinkled and couldn't be worn at all. How intense had they been yesterday? The clothes were thrown on the ground. Lin Feng covered his eyes. Jianghu didn't need to look at him to know what he was thinking. It seemed like this guy had even forgotten that he had taken off his clothes, waved them in his hands and thrown them on the ground casually. "I'm dressed." Lin Feng casually put on a pair of pants and said to Jianghu, "Wait for me." Jianghu reached out and grabbed his wrist. "Are you going to call Little Spade again? Tell me directly if you have anything. Why are you always calling Little Spade? Isn't he experienced? I wanted to ask how to deal with it but you ignored me." Lin Feng grabbed his hair. Jianghu glanced at him. "Go ahead." Lin Feng flew into the washroom like a sparrow freed from its shackles. He called Little Spade and explained the situation before asking, "Do you think I should be more concerned about him? After all, it's his first time being F***ked. He probably can't accept it psychologically." Bojio didn't reply because the Almighty, who was sitting in front of her, took his phone over and showed her his screen. It was a message from Jianghu to the Almighty. There was only one line. "Regardless of what Lin Feng says, get Little Spade to agree." He was so scheming. Did Lin Feng know that he was naive? Bojio asked lazily, "Where are you now?" "In the washroom." Lin Feng glanced at the ceiling. "Do you understand how I feel? As though I've suddenly become a father?" Bojio thought to herself, "I've always been trying my best to be the almighty sugar daddy. What does a new father like you understand? Why are you always in the washroom?" "I'm not afraid of Jianghu hearing me." Lin Feng sighed. "You don't understand how complicated my feelings are. You are the one who doesn't understand. Almighty Yun can predict everything you say. Is there a need to listen? This naive girl, if you think you can turn gay for Almighty Yun, go ahead. If you can't, we're all adults and you don't have to be responsible for sleeping with him. In the end, it all depends on your heart. There are some things that can't be forced. It's best not to force yourself." Bojio's words were honest. It was because she treated them as friends. A relationship born from a misunderstanding wouldn't last long. Because she cared, the hurt would only deepen. But if Lin Feng was willing, the misunderstanding would be a beautiful one. But it was obvious that Qin Imo didn't like hearing her words. The feeling that this person was indifferent to everything came back again. It seemed as though even if he wanted her, it didn't mean that he had her. Qin Mo's heart tightened unconsciously, and even his gaze deepened. He had never been anyone's boyfriend. He wouldn't be. But this person seemed to have never treated him as a boyfriend. With that, Qin Imo reached out and lifted the youngster's chin. He leaned over and kissed her lips. Qin Xiaodong, who was standing at the side, thought. He hadn't expected to witness such a scene. It had happened without any warning. This was the Fu family's house. What if Madame saw? Bo Jiao was startled when she felt a slight chill on her lips. Chapter 954. Bo Jiao hadn't expected the Almighty to kiss her all of a sudden. She was still holding the phone in her hand, her clean and fair face paused for a moment. She even forgot what she wanted to say. She could only look at the handsome face in front of her. When the kiss ended, her lips were brushed by his and it was cold and ticklish. After Jianghu sent the WeChat message, he stuffed his phone into his pocket. When he saw him come out, he pretended to be uneasy and said, "You don't have to take responsibility, we are both guys. It's normal to sleep for a night. It's good enough that you didn't despise me." If Jianghu hadn't said that, Lin Feng wouldn't have felt sorry for him. Especially when he tilted his head, which made him look slightly fragile. "Are you sure it's fragile?" Qin Mo looked at the person in front of him who was holding her phone in a daze. Because she had just woken up, her silver hair was still fluffy. She looked like a little tiger that wanted to be pampered. He couldn't help but lift his thin lips and lean over to kiss the corner of her lips. Qin Xiaodong. "Mommy, I really don't want to see two guys kissing in front of me. I'm a straight guy, I'm gay." In Almighty Qin's eyes, didn't he, a third wheel, exist? Obviously not. Sometimes, kissing was a way to declare his ownership. It wasn't just to let others know, it was also to let Bo Jiao know that she wasn't a big deal. Bo Jiao blinked. The Almighty's gaze seemed to be deep. He seemed to like her, but at the same time, it seemed like he wanted to stuff her into the bin. Hey little spade. Why aren't you saying anything? Is there no signal? On the other end of the line, Lin Feng glanced at his phone, assuming that the washroom was blocking his communication with his brother. "Forget it, I've decided. I'm going to lay my cards on the table." Lin Feng put away his phone and pulled open the wooden door of the bathroom. Lin Feng's gaze was heavy. "I have to take responsibility." Jianghu watched as a certain someone took the bait, looking valiant and high-spirited. He asked the most practical question. "How do you intend to take responsibility?" "Marry you." Lin Feng added, "I'll try my best to marry you." Jianghu didn't know what to say. This guy was still a straight guy. He wanted to marry her after sleeping with her. "You should know how I feel about you." Jianghu followed his train of thought and said, "I won't agree to the arranged marriage and marriage of convenience in novels." Lin Feng thought to himself, "Of course I know what you mean. If you dare to bring up the matter of hitting me, I will cripple you right now." However, he had just slept with her, so he had to be gentle. "Speak." Jianghu replied faintly, "I want to kiss you the moment I see you, so let's start with kissing." "Kiss kiss." Lin Feng's eyes widened. This wasn't within his scope of consideration at all. Jianghu was a two-faced person. "You weren't this excited when you hugged me yesterday." She hugged him and vomited, not daring to let go. Helplessly, when Lin Feng heard that, his mind automatically started to play some small scenes. His face turned red and he felt very uneasy. "All right." Jianghu arched a brow. "What's good about it? Let's start with kissing." Lin Feng leaned over like a man, putting on an expression as if he was a paper tiger. Jianghu replied leisurely, "Are you going to do it or should I?" "Of course I'll do it, I'll be the attacker." Lin Feng was very firm on this point. When Jianghu heard the words "I'll be the attacker," his expression didn't change, he just arched a brow, his gaze deep as he looked at the person he could finally have. Even if it was an illusion, Lin Feng leaned over a little and then a little more. When he was almost there, he felt an inexplicable heat in his ears. He glanced at that person and after a moment he said, "Close your eyes." "Do I need to close my eyes?" Jianghu arched a brow, thinking about this fellow's kissing experience. "Do you close your eyes when kissing your ex-girlfriend?" Lin Feng recalled the last time he scared this fellow, his gaze fluttering. "Of course. Don't people close their eyes when kissing on TV?" "All right." There was a hint of unwillingness in Yunhu's voice. He wasn't willing because if only his first kiss had been his as well. Lin Feng leaned forward again, but this time his ears felt even hotter. Why was Yunhu still so strong even with his eyes closed? It must be because this fellow was too handsome. Lin Feng looked at the tall nose that was inches away from him. In the past he had always been envious of Yunhu's looks. He was the kind of man who had good looks and wasn't feminine at all, unlike him who was naturally tender. When they were close enough, Lin Feng's gaze swept towards Yunhu's lips. For some reason his heart started racing and he felt a little uncomfortable. Thinking about it carefully, who would kiss their brother of more than 20 years. Even when they fooled around, it wasn't like this. After all, they were both men. Lin Feng took a deep breath and said, "Can I kiss your face?" Jianghu opened his eyes, watching Lin Feng's expression. Even though he had concealed his emotions, this fellow had never been an expert in terms of emotions. The slightest bit of unwillingness could be seen. Jianghu's heart sank and he asked, "Is it difficult to kiss?" I really can't kiss you." Lin Feng hadn't finished the word, "go." His thin lips were blocked. Jianghu liked to drink tea, and when he kissed, it was filled with his unique tea fragrance. There was also an indescribable feeling. Lin Feng froze on the spot, his eyes wide open. Jianghu took the opportunity to pry open his lips, the tip of his tongue hooking upwards, not giving him a chance to catch his breath. How could a naive person like Lin Feng be Jianghu's match in this aspect? Just as he was about to speak, Jianghu's kiss wrapped around him. The feeling of the tip of his tongue being sucked made him shudder. There was nothing left in his head, only a blank space. Lin Feng reached out, pushing him away. The back of his hand subconsciously rubbed his thin lips, the burning feeling still lingering. Jianghu, who was pushed away, sat up straight, glanced at him, his fingers brushing across his bitten lips. Lin Feng wanted to explain. After all, Jianghu had tried his best just now. It was hard for him to accept it psychologically. Unexpectedly, Jianghu spoke faster than him. "It's nothing. If you can't accept it now, take it slow. One day you will be able to accept it." With that, he stood up, the fringe on his forehead blocking his eyes. "I'm going to take a shower." Lin Feng opened his mouth, but in the end he didn't say anything. He sat on the bed and grabbed his hair. The shower was turned on. Jianghu stood below, the water droplets sliding down his straight back. That sentence wasn't meant for Lin Feng. It was better to say it to himself. He liked someone for too long. It was so long that he was afraid he would marry someone else one day. But with his grand appearance, he would have to miss it, at the Fu family's house. Bojio was still trying to guess what the Almighty was thinking. Qin Imo glanced at the time on his wrist, saying faintly, "Let's go after eating, we're going to meet the advertiser." "Advertiser?" Bojio arched a brow. "I have to meet him too?" Qin Mo's side profile was very attractive. "Isn't it good to let you earn some pocket money by filming advertisements?" "That's not bad, it proves that I rely on my looks to make a living." Bojio smiled, her love for money was well known. Qin Imo watched as the youngster's eyes fell on the money. He didn't want to admit that he had fallen for her, to the point of being hopeless. If she wanted money, wouldn't it be better for him to be her boyfriend? He had never seen such an idiot before. Qin Imo lowered his gaze, glancing at the display on his phone. It was Feng Yi. The car had arrived, 10 p.m. in the advertising studio. Due to the large amount of investors, there were many celebrities in the studio. Yi Sihua and his manager, who had tried to embarrass Bojio at the gathering 2 days ago, were among them. These 2 days, Yi Sihua's popularity had soared. A popular youth idol drama had helped him gain a lot of fans. But that wasn't the reason for the rise in popularity. The real reason why his value had skyrocketed was because he had appeared on the casting list of an international director, William. Everyone knew that anyone who could show their face in such a blockbuster would have a different meaning in the industry. But Yi Sihua was difficult to negotiate with. The advertiser had already given him a persona. They felt that it wasn't outstanding enough and insisted on 2 more scenes. This advertisement was different from the others. The Chinese director had wanted to film a microfilm advertisement. After all, he was in the electronics industry. But he was just a pretty face, no one would believe him if he claimed to have acted before. He felt that adding 2 more scenes would ruin the beauty. Both parties couldn't hold on. Yi Sihua looked as though he was the big shot, and if they didn't please him, he wouldn't be able to negotiate. The Chinese director had a unique personality, placing the camera over, a smile on her lips as she answered the call. "Teacher? Are you coming over? It would be great if you could come over, you can help me control the scene." After she hung up, the big shot, who had been spoiled by his fans, was still wearing his sunglasses, looking high and mighty. The Chinese director thought to herself, the rumored fresh meat had good looks and acting skills. He even respected the staff. That must be *T. Our condition is still the same, our Sihua's face can't be flashed across the screen. The manager had her considerations. After all, the status of the artiste under her was different now, she had to have some demands. The Chinese director couldn't convince them and was about to walk over to say something. Just then a voice came from the other side. "He's so handsome. Why are young Master Qin and Big Spade here? I can't believe it, Oh my god, I'm satisfied. Big Spade. A professional esports player, the silver-haired handsome youngster. I thought he was cosplaying, how could he be so handsome in real life? The discussion heated up as the two of them walked in. Even the Chinese director looked over curiously. He wouldn't have known if he didn't look, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw it. This was exactly the kind of character that she wanted the most. A laptop advertisement. The theme was mysterious and beautiful. What she wanted to do was to tell a short story with a visual sense. Hence, she had asked the manufacturer to find a couple for her. Even if they weren't a couple, they had to be young and handsome. Handsome didn't have to be rigid, it had to have a unique charm, and it would be best if they weren't bad at computer games. Now, looking at the two of them, the Chinese director only had one thought. It didn't matter if they didn't know how to computer games, as long as they could pose properly, reveal their faces, and add a little expression, it would be perfect. Who are they? The Chinese director had just returned from overseas, pulling a staff over to ask. The staff had an incredulous expression. Young Master Qin and Spade Z, they are the professional esports players who replaced the previous couple. The advertiser got them from their manager, but they only agreed to show their faces. They just arrived. The Chinese director's heart blossomed when she heard the staff's words. She had to make the best use of the actors. Arrange for their makeup and clothes. Makeup was fine, but Qin and Mo wouldn't allow anyone to touch her. Fortunately, they were in a filming studio and the environment wasn't bad. Bojio took the clothes from the staff and smiled faintly. Thank you, I can do it myself. The staff didn't know how to play games and didn't watch esports competitions. But when she saw the youngster's handsome face and thanked her, she couldn't help blushing. She finally understood why so many people were infatuated with this youngster. Even though he was in the esports industry, his popularity was high. He was really handsome. He wasn't just handsome, his gaze was gentle as well. There were many handsome men and beautiful women in the esports industry. But there weren't many people like this youngster who exuded an aura as pure as jade. From afar, Yi Sihua narrowed his eyes, his face darkening. Why is that useless Fu family here? The manager wasn't sure either. I'll go ask. It's fine. Yi Sihua's expression darkened. With young Master Qin by his side, it wouldn't be strange for him to go anywhere. Go ask the director when they are filming. All right. The manager didn't want to provoke young Master Qin since they couldn't wait to fawn over him. Yi Sihua was still looking at the staff. Why would she give the clothes to that useless person? Was he here to film an advertisement? Yi Sihua's eyes dimmed. The staff was still standing outside the changing room. There were two changing rooms. Bojio went to one while Qin and Mo went to the other. The staff paced back and forth, hoping to catch a glimpse of the youngster after she changed her clothes. After about 3 minutes, Bojio walked out. Actually, this was what she usually wore when she was at the Fifth Avenue. He was wearing a white shirt, a black trench coat, a long tie, and a pure black mask on his face. This was to reduce his presence. Unexpectedly, the clothes for the advertisement were the same. Bojio arched a brow, reaching out to loosen her tie. The Chinese director and the staff were dazzled by her handsomeness. Chapter 955. The Chinese director's eyes lit up. She couldn't wait to get the cameraman to start the shoot. This was the male lead in her heart. How could someone be so perfect? Even with the mask, it couldn't hide the superstar aura he exuded. When the Chinese director had first seen the youngster, she had felt that he looked too clean and pure. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to bring out the mysterious effect. Unexpectedly, as compared to the previous set of clothes, the black trench coat and mask were more suitable for him. The moment Bojio came out, she was stared at by the two girls. Usually she had a strong tolerance, but today she was being stared at for a long time. She paused for a moment before asking, "May I ask, what kind of advertisement are we shooting?" The stage supervisor snapped back to her senses and was about to speak. Qin and Mo pushed the door open and walked out, silencing the entire set once more. Some people, regardless of what they wore, would be able to bring out their unique aura. Noble, indifferent, porcelain white skin. This was everyone's first impression of Qin and Mo. At this moment, Qin and Mo was wearing a white shirt, holding a can of beer in his hand. His collar was half open. He had wet his hair for the styling. Black strands of hair scattered across his forehead, water droplets sliding down the bridge of his nose. He looked casual and sexy. So handsome. Someone sucked in a sharp breath. Bojio turned, looking at the person. She was met with a pair of deep eyes. The moment Qin and Mo saw her, the color of his eyes deepened. They were separated by half the studio, one in the light and the other in the dark. Bojio was still wearing the mask. In that instant, her heart skipped a beat. It was because she suddenly remembered something. The Almighty had seen her at Fifth Avenue. Even though it had just been a brush. But back then she had been wearing a black trench coat with a hood and a black mask. Other than the color of her hair, she had looked exactly the same as now. Bojio wasn't sure if the Almighty would remember the time they had brushed shoulders when he saw her in this state. For some reason she felt a little guilty. She tilted her head and prayed in her heart, "Don't remember, don't remember." Just as she was thinking about this, a person appeared in front of her. That person enveloped her on the spot. It could be said that she bumped into that person's arms. When the tip of his nose touched the white shirt, he let out a long sigh. Just like this, it didn't seem like he didn't recognize him at all. "You don't even know how to walk?" A melodious voice sounded from above. Bojio glanced up and touched the bridge of her nose. Qin Mo studied the youngster's face, especially when his gaze swept over her masked face. His voice was faint, a little nonchalant. "In the past, when I went to America to play, I bumped into someone who looked like you." Bojio's left hand, which was in her pocket, paused. When she smiled, her eyes were sincere. "I'm so handsome, how can there be someone like me? I really want to meet him." Z. When she heard the code name, Bojio tilted her head. Through the mask she asked, "What?" "The person I bumped into in America was Z." Qin Mo's side profile remained emotionless. Bojio paused, widening her eyes. With the mask on, she looked extremely innocent. "Brother Mo, you mean that I look like Z?" Qin Mo's thin lips lifted. He paused and leaned forward, whispering into her ear, "It's a pity that you aren't an actor." Bojio's heart sank, but the corners of her eyes lifted. She looked mischievous. "It's indeed a waste of my good looks if I don't act. In such a public event. There would definitely be many people looking over." Bojio could hear the commotion around her, but it probably wouldn't affect the Almighty much. But for the sake of Feng Yi, she had to remind the Almighty, "Brother Mo, this is a filming studio." She meant for him to restrain himself. Otherwise, Manager Feng would have to go out to drink and explain. It would be rather pitiful. With that, Qin Mo pinched Bojio's chin. He didn't kiss her, but that position wasn't any different from a kiss. "It seems like we have to talk again tonight." Because of Qin Mo's domineering action, the Chinese director was inspired again. His eyes were as bright as the headlights of a car. Bojio had no choice but to push him away. "Brother Mo, there's someone else." At this moment, Manager Feng was almost in tears. "Little Spade, it wasn't a waste for me to dote on you. When young Master Qin was showing off his love, you even helped me hold him back." Come. Feng Yi pulled Bojio's arm decisively, moving her to the side. When he did this, he braced himself to do it. It was mainly because of the coldness emanating from Qin Mo's eyes. His presence was too strong. He really didn't know how Little Spade could withstand such a strong aura. At the end of the day, Little Spade was thick-skinned. The Chinese director was in the best mood. "I suddenly have a good idea. Hurry, set up the scene at the side." Yi Sihua, who had been neglected, was now as dark as the clouds in the sky. After all, he was a popular movie star. What was wrong with this director? Did he really think that a gamer would be more popular than him? Yi Sihua had to admit that things would be different with young Master Qin's participation. Hence, even if it was a commercial, it would be a commercial for him and young Master Qin. That useless Fu family would only bring down his standards. Besides, even if he could play the piano, he wouldn't be presentable. Filming a commercial wasn't easy. It was about not being stiff, being able to look at the camera and having some acting skills. Did that useless thing? "We are in a rush to finish the film. Everyone hurry up," the Chinese director said as he glanced at Yi Sihua, who was still seated in the corner. Yi Sihua wasn't stupid. He knew it wouldn't be good for either of them if it dragged on. He stood up and spoke to his manager. The manager nodded and walked towards Feng Yi. Coincidentally, the Chinese director was there too. The manager's attitude was different now. He smiled and said, "If we knew that young Master Qin would be appearing in the commercial, our Sihua would have agreed long ago. It seems like it's fate. Director Li, when can we start filming?" Even though the Chinese director had just returned from overseas, he was still in the same industry. One look at his manager was enough to tell what kind of person he was. She picked up the script she had written for the scene, her tone calm. "Change your clothes and read the script." Yi Sihua watched from the side. Didn't this little director know that the industry was small? With such an attitude, didn't he know that the industry was small? The manager knew that Lee Si-hwa wasn't in a good mood. When she walked back, she whispered something in Lee Si-hwa's ear, reminding him to restrain himself with young Master Qin around. Of course I know, don't worry. Lee Si-hwa licked his lips, his eyes dimming. I'll deal with this director in the future. As for the person who gave up gaming and insisted on filming a commercial, I'll let him know the difference between us. The manager was still worried. He came with young Master Qin. I won't do anything on the surface. Lee Si-hwa laughed sinisterly. Don't forget, this commercial has a storyline and there are 3 main characters. Since he is so desperate to prove himself, I'll let him know that it isn't easy to be a main character. The manager's eyes widened. You mean to suppress the scene? Suppressing the scene was a term used in the industry. In the beginning, when experienced actors with good acting skills wanted to teach some fresh meat a lesson, they would occasionally use this trick. After all, there were some who didn't even fulfill their role as an actor. They didn't memorize their lines and went around taking part in variety shows, dragging down the production. In the end, some of the more scheming celebrities used suppressing the scene to plot against each other. Especially when 2 people with similar reputations were together. In order to enhance their image, they would use suppressing the scene. But the manager hadn't expected Lee Si-hwa to use such a tactic on someone who had never acted before. What? You don't like it? Lee Si-hwa glanced at him, his words going straight to the point. Don't forget, there are 3 people in this commercial. The best way to make everyone think I'm the spokesperson is to stand out. The manager nodded in agreement, giving him a thumbs up. On the other side, Bo-jio was already seated in the makeup room, her lids lowered as she flipped through the script she had written on the spot. At the same time, she was trying to think of a way to escape the conversation with the Almighty. The makeup artist was having a hard time with her. Her eyelashes were black and long, there wasn't a need for makeup. She could use some eyeliner to enhance the depth of her features. That would be more in line with the character in the script. But as for the rest, the makeup artist caressed her smooth and fair face, praising sincerely. Your skin is so good, you don't need to put on foundation. If too many things were applied to this face, it would ruin its original handsomeness. Now that he had brought out a spy, he really looked like the main character of a Korean drama. The Chinese director was getting impatient, asking Bo-jio, have you found the feeling? When Bo-jio received the script, she didn't know what to say. It was about a hacker. She didn't need to find the feeling. The Chinese director noticed the youngster's silence, assuming that he was nervous because he hadn't been in this industry before. Hence he softened his tone. Don't worry, just act naturally. Even if you can't find the feeling, your face is more than enough. Come, stand back a little. The Chinese director walked to the side, making space for everyone. He raised the loudspeaker, his eyes bright as he shouted, everyone get ready. First scene, action. Swoosh. The lights in the studio were all dimmed. It was the layout of a billiard hall. The light that shone down was a little dim. However, the slender figure standing beside the billiard table wasn't dim at all. That wasn't all. When the light shone down, it seemed as though he was tall and slender. He stood there casually with a laptop in front of him. He seemed to be a little bored. He hooked his index finger, opened the can, and for some reason the corner of his mouth curled up. The girls were going crazy as they watched from the side. I finally understand why everyone says that young Master Qin is the prettiest in Jianghu City. He's so handsome. I'm so envious of young Master Qin's future girlfriend. She can look at his face every day. And his figure, young Master Qin is a walking clothes rack. I can't take it anymore, my nose is going to bleed. The girl said that because just as Qin Mo was about to raise his head to take a sip of the ice-cold beer, his eyes seemed to have seen something. He turned towards the door. The camera panned in that direction as well. A young man in a black trench coat walked in from the door. He was probably in the middle of a run. As he was a little thin, he wore a black mask which made his eyes look very black and bright. His entire person seemed to have been drawn with a line pen. The black and white were distinct, and in an instant he caught the entire camera. At this moment Lee Si-hwa was there too. He was also one of them, playing with a black tablet in his hands. His eyes were fixed on the youngster who was walking over. He had wanted to portray an indifferent person, but to add to his acting, Lee Si-hwa stood in front of Bo-jio, his voice cold and aloof. I heard your skills aren't bad, wanna play a game? It was a last-minute change of script, but since the scene wasn't too bad, the Chinese director didn't ask for a pause. The moment she had seen Bo-jio, she had probably forgotten that he wasn't an actor and had only wanted to continue filming. Bo-jio was still wearing the black mask, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her trench coat. She didn't even glance at Isihua, replying through the mask, "I'm not interested." The Chinese director felt that the youngster's performance was perfect. The youngster's performance was more in line with the character she wanted to portray, bringing the character to life. Isihua would never have expected the trash to perform so well in front of the camera. Initially, he had wanted to use his impromptu acting skills to silence the youngster. It would be best if there were more NGs. But now, because of the youngster's reply, the camera swept past him, focusing on the youngster. Anyone who knew how to act would know that Isihua was the one who was being suppressed, and it was a harsh suppression. But Bojio couldn't be blamed. She hadn't been interested in this person. Besides, he had changed his script at the last minute. Everything Bojio did was a natural reaction. After all, she knew that the person she was facing was the Almighty, who was standing at the side of the billiards hall. In the camera, the youngster had already passed Isihua, placing the thin laptop on the table and starting to type. Bojio's typing speed had always been fast. Chapter 956. How could there be someone who could move so quickly? Also, the innate sense of being in the camera. Every single detail shocked everyone in the photography team. It was just an advertisement, but it made them want to continue watching. It wasn't just because of the storyline, but also because of the strange tension between the youngster and young Master Qin. The Chinese director didn't forget his mission in the midst of his shock, shifting the camera to the youngster's notebook. There was a huge close-up, especially the bright silver logo which matched the youngster's hair color. The shot took 3 seconds. The next second the scene changed. Someone reached out to support the youngster's side across the billiard table. His slender figure lowered, his nose bridge high, his lips thin and his eyes dark. He looked like a flirt. But he didn't even glance at the back of the beauties around him. Instead, he stared at the youngster, his sexy lips lifting into a faint smile. That person wasn't anyone else, it was Qin Imo. Bojio glanced up, their gazes meeting. In that instant, the cover of the notebook was extremely clear. The tension between the two of them became even more obvious. Even though there was hostility in their eyes when their faces came close, there was an extra hint of ambiguity that made it hard for people to look away. Were they really not a couple? This was the thought in everyone's mind. Some were impressed by the director for coming up with such a scene. This advertisement would definitely be popular. Just based on this scene, no one would ignore the notebook between the two of them. Isihua had an extra second of footage, but his gaze wasn't on him. Instead, after Qin Imo spoke, everyone's gaze was focused on him. "Who are you?" That was Qin Mo's line. It was a short 3 words, but because of his actions and the way he looked at the youngster's thin lips, it was extremely alluring. Bojio stood up, walking past the billiard table and picking up a cue stick. When the youngster was doing this, she lifted her trench coat and removed it with one hand. Then she picked up the cue stick and lowered her body, aiming it at the colored ball on the table. A loud swoosh. The colored ball bypassed the half-open silver notebook and landed in the middle of the net. Just the sound alone was enough to tell that it was a beautiful shot. At this moment, there was an uproar in the studio. Worried that it would affect the filming, everyone covered their mouths as they turned towards her. He was too handsome. The Chinese director felt a little dizzy from the shock again. He quickly moved the camera to capture the scene. When the youth was playing, his shirt was pulled up, revealing a fair jade-like skin. That curve was astonishingly beautiful. Qin Mo's gaze seemed to have stopped there as well. It was dark and deep to the extreme. The youngster retracted her cue and picked up her coat from the billiard table. She casually draped it over her shoulder and smiled devilishly. "Why should I tell you?" What followed was the young man's carefree back view. Qin Imo stood there looking at the back view like a devil. He pressed his fingers on the notebook and closed it gently. His thin lips curved slightly and he laughed playfully. "Heh." Finally, the screen stopped at the notebook. Apart from the notebook's logo, there was only a line of words, "Unfinished, to be continued, Kacha." It signaled the end of the shoot. The Chinese director was the first to stand up and clap. The others couldn't hold it in any longer. Previously, they had been afraid to disturb the two of them, but now, everyone stood up and let out a heartfelt exclamation. After all, even a professional actor wouldn't be able to complete the shoot in one take. More importantly, filming this commercial didn't just require the other party to type fast. The scene just now was also a test of their skills. The photography team had originally wanted to use these things for post-production. Who would have expected that Spadesy didn't just do it? He was so handsome that he could turn the commercial into a movie. This wasn't something that could be done easily. The atmosphere in the studio was unprecedentedly intense. When Bojo walked back, the crew were all looking at her like a fangirl. As for Lee Si-hwa's whereabouts, no one cared anymore. His face was completely sunken. He wanted to flare up, but he didn't dare. He could only suppress his anger. He didn't want to watch the commercial anymore. He didn't even need to watch it to know that the scene just now had been a deliberate attempt by that useless person to humiliate him. Lee Si-hwa's popularity had been suppressed. Of course he wasn't in a good mood. He threw his jacket aside and left with his manager. When he left, his mood wasn't quite right. Of course the staff in the studio could see it. But so what? Anyone who saw the scene just now would know that Lee Si-hwa was up to no good. A professional actor was bullying someone who had never acted before. In the end he had been suppressed. It was an awkward slap to his face. Lee Si-hwa was still hoping that someone in the studio would ask him to stay. After he walked out, he asked his manager, "Did anyone follow me?" His manager shook his head in embarrassment. Lee Si-hwa raised his leg and kicked the bin beside him. "What is that?" His manager hurriedly consoled him. "It's just a commercial and the director is a newcomer. Even if young Master Chin is around, it won't have much commercial value. You are one of the candidates that Director William admires, this is nothing." After hearing his consolation, Lee Si-hwa's anger subsided a little. "Go and find out where the director is from. He's so disrespectful he might as well stop filming." "I know what you mean, I'll ask him now." As the agent spoke, she turned on her cell phone and dialed a familiar number. "Reporter Lee? Listen to what you're saying, I don't have anything to reveal to you. However, there's someone I want to ask about for this shoot." After hearing the manager's words, the person on the other end of the line replied faintly. The manager's expression changed completely. Lee Si-hwa couldn't hear the conversation and could only look at his face. He frowned impatiently. What did he say? Where did the director come from? The agent's hand that was holding the phone slowly lowered as he muttered, "Director William." Lee Si-hwa replied, "I'm asking you where the director came from, why are you mentioning Director William?" The manager's face was pale, he glanced up at Lee Si-hwa. "She followed Director William back to China, she is his only disciple." Instantly Lee Si-hwa's expression changed, even his lips stiffened. He wanted to go back but there was no way for him to do so. After all, he had left in a fit of anger, it would only embarrass him if he went back. But how did the director become Director William's disciple? Lee Si-hwa was about to go crazy, anger and embarrassment surging through him. The manager was afraid he would do something else, hence he pulled him into the nanny van. The manager knew that this wasn't just a commercial they had lost, they were afraid of losing even more. The atmosphere in the studio remained the same. No one noticed that in an inconspicuous corner, a foreigner had been watching for a long time. A foreigner had been sitting there watching for a long time. Beside him was an assistant. Ever since the cameras had started, he had been sitting there, his gaze following Bojo's every movement. At this moment he only had one thought in his mind. Even if this person had a bad reputation, the young hacker in his movie had to be played by him. Did you see the expression on the youngster's face when he was typing and playing the ball? He is the person we are looking for. Old William couldn't be blamed for his agitation. He had seen many profiles but none of them were as stunning as the youngster every time they met. He fits the role perfectly, be it in terms of looks or personality, he is perfect. He has to be the one, he has to be the one. When old William reached the end of his sentence, he could not help but stand up. Bojo had already changed her clothes and was walking out of the studio. Chinamo didn't leave because he had something to discuss. Bojo wanted to buy some medicine. As long as she took the medicine within 24 hours, she would be fine. When she left, Bojo took the black mask from the filming crew. She wore it and was about to cross the traffic light. Wait a minute. The person who spoke wasn't very fluent in Chinese, because the two words that came out of his mouth carried a unique accent of a foreigner. Bojo turned towards the direction of the voice. The person who stopped her was a middle-aged foreigner. He was dressed in a traditional Chinese tunic suit, which made him look elegant. For a foreigner to be elegant, this person's experience would not be very low. I saw your advertisement just now. Are you interested in acting in the movie? Old William asked directly. He didn't care what stupid conditions the youngster had to come up with in order to become famous. As long as he could maintain the state he had been in during the advertisement, he would agree. After all, perfection in the movie was the most important. However, he hadn't expected the youngster to reply. The youth only gave him two words, no. His tone was calm and emotionless. The youngster seemed to be in a hurry as he walked towards the opposite direction. Old William stilled for a moment before blurting out, "I don't think you know who I am. You should have heard of Hollywood." The youngster paused, arching a brow. "I don't care who you are, I'm not interested in acting in the movie." Old William hadn't expected such an answer. Hadn't he always wanted to be famous? Acting in a movie will bring you more attention than playing esports. Old William felt that it wasn't logical. "That's not what I meant. I meant that you are a natural actor. Are you sure you don't want to try?" "I don't want to." Bojio wanted to buy some medicine. Once the Almighty was done, she might not have the chance to buy it. Old William stilled once more. This was the first time he wanted someone to act in his movie, but she wasn't interested at all. "But you acted well just now. Why don't you want to act?" Bojio watched as the foreigner followed her. She didn't care anymore and crossed the traffic light. "No reason." The assistant next to him was a little surprised to see this. Over the years, no one had ever rejected the olive branch that director William had extended to them. He was a director who created stars. As long as the main character acted in his movie, even if they weren't popular before, they would be known quickly and become a superstar. Everyone had to admit that he was a world-class director. The movies he produced were equally shocking. Many Chinese celebrities wished they could be the lucky ones when they heard that director William was going to cast them. But this youngster, the assistant walked over and whispered something to her. Bojio arched a brow. The assistant smiled. "You have to introduce yourself before you start the discussion. Director William really thinks that you fit the image of an actor in his mind. Do you want to reconsider?" "No," Bojio replied without hesitation. She had the cheekiness of a youngster. "I have something to do. Since you are an international celebrity, you shouldn't keep following me. You might get photographed." The assistant had thought that everything would be resolved if she mentioned director William's name. But from the looks of it, the youngster didn't seem to have any intention of acting. The assistant turned to look at his boss. "The information we received wasn't accurate." Chapter 957. Bojio wasn't familiar with birth control pills, but she knew it was better to keep a low profile when buying such pills. There weren't many people in the pharmacy, just a few scattered around. Fortunately, they were all elderly aunties. If it was an ordinary young lady and someone recognized her, the situation would definitely be bad. She didn't mind, but manager phone would probably go crazy. It was better not to have news of esports players buying birth control pills. Bojio wore a mask. She looked around but couldn't find what she was looking for. The medicine probably couldn't be placed on the counter, hence she couldn't find it on the medicine rack. It seemed like she would have to ask the pharmacist. Bojio sighed inwardly as she walked towards the counter. "Hi, get me a box of birth control pills." The doctor standing at the counter glanced up at Bojio. "Which brand do you want?" There was a brand? For the first time, Bojio felt she wasn't cultured enough. She chose a conservative answer. "I'll take whichever brand has the best effect." However, it was this answer that made the shopping guide shake his head and murmur, "Young people nowadays are really—" Bojio wasn't young in her heart, but she hadn't come into contact with such things in her previous life. If it wasn't for the lack of time, she would have wanted to bring the Almighty's child back to the Fifth Avenue. But now, Bojio clenched her fists. This was the only way. A total of 25. Cash or Alipay? The pharmacist glanced over, scanning the barcode. Bojio felt that it wasn't a good time to use her phone. She reached into her pockets but didn't bring any cash. In the end, she inhaled deeply and used her phone. "Is WeChat okay?" "Yes." The pharmacist's expression didn't change. Bojio whipped out her phone. The moment she unlocked the screen, she received a message. It was from the Almighty with only 2 words. "Where are you?" Bojio glanced at the image of the cartoon. She hesitated for a moment but didn't reply. Instead, she opened the payment function. The pharmacist scanned the barcode and passed the medicine to her. Bojio lowered her gaze, her silver hair covering her face as she took the medicine. Suddenly, a deep and familiar voice rang out from above her head. "Shouldn't you explain what you're doing?" Bojio's back stiffened. She only had one hope in her heart, that the Almighty was like her, lacking knowledge in certain areas. The hand that was holding the medicine paused for a moment. Then Bojio quickly stuffed the medicine into her pocket. Even her gaming speed wasn't as fast as it was now. After she was done, Bojio glanced over, meeting Qin Mo's icy gaze behind her. She had never seen an Almighty like this. His deep eyes were extremely deep. Before she could say anything, Chinamo had already reached out and pulled out the wrist that the youngster had stuffed into his pocket. His voice was as indifferent as the storm before the storm. "What is this?" Bojio opened her mouth, her throat moving. "Medicine." "What medicine?" Chinmo's handsome face didn't show any emotion, but the cold aura he exuded could freeze the surroundings. Bojio didn't reply because she didn't know how to explain. Chinmo glanced at the two words "Yuding." He wanted to crush the person in front of him and swallow her into his stomach. That way she would know who exactly she belonged to. That way she wouldn't have come to buy this medicine. If that was the case, she wouldn't be thinking of leaving even now. Chinmo lowered his body, taking the medicine from Bojio's hands. Bojio watched as the medicine slowly deformed in his hands. It seemed as though he wanted to destroy it. But the Almighty's emotions didn't change. Because of this, Bojio knew that he was really angry. Chinmo lowered his lids, clutching the box of medicine in his palms. With a voice that he had never used before, he said, "I asked you to wait at the same spot but you never waited. Just like at night, when I sleep, I would think about what that arrogant little Joe is doing. I want to wake up earlier so that I can see her earlier. It's the first time I want to kiss someone but I can't do it. You probably don't understand this feeling at all. That's why you bought this medicine here." Bojio wanted to say something. But the Almighty seemed to be listening to her explanation. "Do you think I'm illiterate or that I don't recognize this brand? Since you don't want to be together, let's break up." After saying that, the Almighty only gave her a distant view of his back. Bojio had seen that back view way too many times before she had gotten close to the Almighty. But there had never been a time like this when she couldn't breathe. She wasn't sure when it started to rain. When Bojio walked out, the Almighty was nowhere to be seen. He must have been picked up by the Chin family's car. Bojio clenched her fists, her gaze sinking. She stood in the rain, her hair slightly damp. Her back was still straight, but it had never been as listless as it was today. She was like a little tiger that had been caught in the rain and didn't know how to warm herself up. Perhaps because the person who could warm her up had left, she didn't care about the water splashing on her. That was how Feng Yi saw her when he rushed over. From what he could remember, the devilish youngster had never been like this. Had they quarreled? That was Feng Yi's first reaction. Where was Bosch Qin? He glanced left and right, unable to find him. Feng Yi was almost certain that they had quarreled. He reached out to press down on his brows. His head started to hurt. If even little Spade was like this, he could almost imagine young Master Qin being in a bad mood and how low his aura would be for the entire day. He guessed that the managers of the various departments would be having a tough time. But how did they end up in such a state? With young Master Qin's personality, even if he was angry, he would have taken little Spade away to teach her a lesson. Why did he leave her here? Feng Yi frowned, bringing Bojio into the car. It wasn't good to be drenched like this. He tried to communicate with the youngster. "Weren't you fine just now? How did you end up like this after buying some medicine?" Bojio glanced out of the window, the rainwater trailing down the ends of her silver hair. She didn't care, her handsome face tilted to the side, hiding her expression. Her mind was still ringing with that sentence. "Since you don't want to be together, let's break up." Breaking up was only a matter of time. She had no choice but to reject it. She had overestimated her tolerance. Just a few words could affect her to such an extent. If she waited until the Almighty found out about her identity, he would frown and look at her in disgust. She probably wouldn't be able to take it. Bojio reached out to press her fringe down. When her phone rang, her voice was slightly hoarse. "Hello." It was a call from the school. Bojio's boarding application had been approved and the school had asked her to bring her luggage over. Even if she still had to participate in the competition, she still had to follow the school's basic procedures. In reality, Bojio wasn't in the mood to think about what the other party had said. But she could do something to distract her. If she stayed in the school, it wouldn't be too abrupt when she left. Bojio had been stalling for time. She understood all too well that no one would feel good when someone suddenly disappeared. But if everyone knew that the person beside them was an international criminal, He Honghua would probably be frightened. She didn't want to see that. This time she had used her identity to return, which meant that some people were already aware of her return. Among them there would be people who wanted her dead. If they found out about her identity, He Honghua would be in danger. Hence she had to leave. Just like back then, even if she didn't want to leave her puppy without saying goodbye, she still had to leave. Bojio still remembered that night. After she had climbed onto the balcony, she had used a lot of strength to enter his room. In order to prevent her from attacking him at night, he had always placed some flowers and plants on the balcony. At that time she hadn't cared about those things. After sneaking into the room, she had looked at him sleeping on the bed and leaned over to kiss his face. She thought that she might as well carry him away. She was strong anyway. But Bojio knew that her puppy wouldn't leave with her. He had his own things to do in his own family. It would be boring to watch her typing every day. And he would meet with danger. Just as her father had said, it wasn't suitable for the young lord of the hacker world to have friends around her. It was still raining outside. Droplets of rain fell on the car window. The Land Rover was very good at preventing rain, especially for military use. It was almost impossible to hear the sound of rain outside. But even so, the driver sitting in the driver's seat didn't dare to say anything at this time. Ever since his young master had entered the car, he had been sitting at the back without saying a word. Rainy days had always been his young master's taboo. Usually his young master wouldn't go out at this time. This time it was probably because young Master Joe was following him. Even though the weather wasn't good, his young master didn't seem to be uncomfortable. But now, where was young Master Joe? The driver didn't dare to ask this question because his young master's expression was unprecedentedly cold. Chinamo didn't feel anything. From the start till the end, his left hand hadn't loosened. There was a box of medicine in his left hand. The box of medicine had been squeezed to a certain extent. Chinmo's fingers were still the same as before, not softening in the slightest. If it wasn't for this box of medicine, perhaps he could have told himself. He was different in that fellow's heart. Even though that fellow had many secrets. In front of him, she would treat him sincerely and wouldn't reject being with him. But now that he thought about it, he was the one who said they wanted to be together. It could be said that he had forced her. In her heart, perhaps he wasn't that different. But he was wrong to think that she treated him the same way he treated her. That feeling was as though he had taken a step forward confidently but didn't notice the steps in front of him. He missed his step and fell down with his head bleeding. The pain was unbearable. Chinamo loosened his left hand and glanced at the car window. After the car reached the military courtyard, he remained in the same position. Movie Queen and had just finished shopping with He Honghua. She had wanted to sit with Jio for a chat, but when she opened the car door, only her son was left. What was this? Movie Queen and arched a brow and looked at her son's face. Chinamo alighted from the car, not caring if there were any raindrops on him. He said faintly, "I'm tired, I'll head upstairs first." The intelligent Movie Queen and quickly realized that there was a problem. She wanted to head upstairs to ask him but felt that as a parent, she shouldn't interfere with her child's relationship. After entering the room, Chinamo acted as though nothing had happened. He unbuttoned his shirt and threw his clothes to the side before entering the bathroom. He allowed the water to splash on his head, as though he was trying to clear his head. Indeed, he was much more clear-headed. At the very least, he knew that person's true thoughts. In hindsight, what was so good about that person? She had never been willing to listen to him, much less take him seriously. When had he, Chinamo, been so lowly? Chinamo chuckled. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. The coldness in his body didn't seem to be dissipating. Instead, it became thicker after he came out of the bathroom. He sat there looking at his open laptop. His neck tilted back. Enough. It was indeed enough. But even though he said that, after Chinamo came down from the stairs, Movie Queen and noticed something different about her son. For example, he kept looking at his phone. He seemed to be waiting for someone's message. But when he saw the screen, his eyes dimmed again. When he finally received a message, it was from his secretary. "I'm going to the office." Chinamo stood up. This was the first time he didn't want to have nothing to do. Time trickled by. Bojio was the last student to board the plane at number 1 middle school. The dormitory manager's expression wasn't any better. But she didn't make things difficult for him. The news of Bojio moving into the male dormitory spread through the entire number 1 middle school in an instant. Of course, it attracted many onlookers. Everyone in the dormitory would stop and glance at Bojio. After all, the school hunk staying in the dormitory wasn't something they could be happy about. Moreover, he was an esports star. How many girls would be attracted to him? They didn't have any hope in the future. But there were some who were optimistic. With Bojio here, things would be easier. For example, a photo of the school hunk for 5 yuan. No one knew that Bojio had chosen to move in today because she didn't want to be alone. Chapter 958. The environment in the male dormitory could be described with 3 words: dirty, messy, and bad. Bojio carried her suitcase in. The person who was cooking instant noodles stilled. He hurriedly pulled out the plug and glanced to the side. It couldn't be the school hunk was staying in our dormitory? There were 6 people in the dormitory including Bojio. One of the other 5 was a thorny student from number 1 middle school. The thorny student laughed coldly. He still didn't like Bojio. He glanced to his left and right, intending to walk over in an imposing manner. But Bojio threw her suitcase up, stuffing one hand into her pocket. She was wearing her school uniform, her jacket half open. She stood sideways, looking as fierce as ever since she entered the school. Even her eyes were cold. "I'm not in a good mood today. Don't provoke me." The thorny student was even more displeased. Didn't she know there were rules in the dormitory? How dare she be so arrogant in his territory? What did she mean? "I say, do you still want to live?" Before the thorny student could finish his sentence, he reached out to grab the youngster's wrist. But the youngster twisted it cleanly. There was a loud bang. The thorny student was slightly dizzy from the fall. He glanced at the chandelier in the dormitory and shook his head. F***ck, why hadn't anyone told him that the top student was so good at fighting? Bojio lowered her lids. "First, I'm not in a good mood. Second, the one who provoked first is AB*TC. My patience is limited." The thorny student was really hurt. The one who cooked the noodles had always admired Bojio. Now that she was in such a state, he sighed. He hadn't expected the expert in the game to be so good in real life. The thorny student was convinced. He changed his attitude, and after he got up, he cleared a spot for Bojio, pouring her tea and water. Bojio sat on the only wooden chair in the dormitory. Her head hurt. She had never thought of being so domineering. But it seemed like she couldn't change her image anymore. "Boss, don't worry, no one would dare to provoke us in this building." The thorny student fanned her while gossiping. "But boss, why did you suddenly decide to stay in school? Shouldn't good students like you study at home?" Bojio glanced at him. "Based on what you're saying, those who stay on campus aren't good students? I want to experience life." Experience life? That thornhead let out a long sigh. He didn't really understand the world of a top student. When she spoke, she didn't forget to take in the surroundings. "I have a condition." "Conditional exchange?" The other 5 looked at each other. "Although I don't do homework, I can still solve some questions. I can help you solve your homework. Similarly, don't let these things appear in the dormitory." Bojio pointed at the dirty socks that were strewn all over the place. "There are also these. Besides, we are all hunks and should know the most basic etiquette. It's fine to take off your shirt since the weather is hot, but walking around in just your underwear is an eyesore. If you have a good figure, it might be worth looking at. If you don't, are you showing your bottom line?" The boy, who was only wearing a pair of underwear, inexplicably felt like he had been shot. However, since everyone was handsome, everyone in the dormitory agreed. Most importantly, there might be girls coming to visit in the future. Bojio stood at the window, glancing down at the girls who were pacing back and forth. She didn't doubt their offensive abilities. "Some of them will take pictures. You guys probably don't want to be caught in the most embarrassing scene. It isn't good to find a girlfriend like this." The moment Bojio finished her sentence, the boy in his underwear leaped into his bed. The boys who didn't care about their appearance changed their clothes and looked at themselves in the mirror. As the roommates of the school hunk, their looks had to be up to par. In the past, no girls had come to visit them. In the future, they would definitely be asked out by girls. From now on, they would have to take care of themselves. At first, the atmosphere was still all right. Suddenly, someone said, "Young Master Jio is here. Will young Master Qin come to visit in the future? Will my favorite Almighty Lin Feng come too?" Bojio didn't listen to what the person said. The 2 words, young Master Qin, seemed to have pierced a certain nerve. It wasn't painful, but the moment she thought about it, she became much quieter. "Think about it, the entire Supreme Alliance team will come to our dorm. Young Master Qin's arrival will definitely attract a huge crowd." The person was completely immersed in his own imagination. Bojio glanced up, her voice calm. "He won't come." "Ah." The people in the dorm were confused. Why did young Master Jio look like he had fallen out of love? No, they couldn't make wild guesses. In the past, they had thought that young Master Jio was definitely gay like the rumors said. But now, which gay was that strong? The rumors couldn't be trusted. But why did young Master Jio come to stay in the dorm? It was a mystery. "Do you have a cigarette?" Suddenly, the young man spoke again, interrupting his roommate's thoughts. "Give me one." He even smoked? This didn't match their image of the top student in school. Second brother watched the corridor. Howl when the hostel manager comes. The moment the thornhead spoke, even the boy in underwear cooperated. Their efficiency was high. It was obvious that they had done such things often. Smoking had always been a group activity. It was normal for everyone to have a cigarette in the high school dorm. But it was hard for them to accept the fact that the school hunk smoked. Bojio didn't look at their shocked gazes. She tilted her head and lit the cigarette. She stood by the window, not wanting to move. "Hey, don't you think the school hunk is a little listless? He looks completely different from when he beat me up. He's probably thinking about the competition. Didn't you see his cooperation with young Master Qin? Was amazing." Bojio turned at the mention of young Master Qin. "Didn't I mention that I'm not in a good mood? You gave the entire dorm a show of strength the moment you entered. It was obvious you weren't in a good mood. But why? Do you want to know the reason?" Bojio flicked the cigarette ash, her gaze deepening. The 5 roommates looked at the youngster, nodding in unison. Bojio glanced up, her voice cold. "I was dumped by young Master Qin." "Everyone? Didn't he say he wasn't gay?" It was finally quiet. No one mentioned young Master Qin's name again. Bojio extinguished the cigarette and glanced at her phone screen. She hesitated for a long time but didn't send the message. Her roommates didn't dare to talk about her situation since young Master Jio's martial arts skills were too strong. But young Master Jio was probably the only one who could be so handsome after falling out of love. Bojio's mood didn't change even after 2 consecutive cigarettes. She leaned against the wall. Even if she wasn't handsome, she was still listless. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Her roommates felt that since their new boss was here, they had to celebrate. "Do you want to go out for a meal? The big plate chicken at the school entrance is a must-have." Bojio glanced at them. Indeed, she wanted to go out for a walk. Staying here like this made her feel stifled. "Let's go." Bojio extinguished the cigarette and walked out. There was a new scenery in number 1 middle school today. The other 5 walked in front. The youngster stuffed her hands into her pockets and followed behind. She wore a black mask and lowered her head to look at her phone. The girls passing by felt their hearts go out of control. Ever since Bojio joined the competition, she hadn't been to school much. Now that she was living in the dormitory, it became a benefit for the girls. The legendary Big Plate Chicken was just opposite the school. It was just a road away. Since it wasn't summer break yet, the weather wasn't particularly hot. Setting up a stall outside the shop and enjoying the natural breeze while eating was a form of enjoyment for the male high school students. Beer was a must. Since she didn't have any lessons today, she was just living in the school. Thorny took a bottle of beer. Just as he was about to pour half a glass for Bojio, the youngster took a bottle over. She bit down on it, opened the cap and gulped it down. The 5 roommates were stunned once more. They watched as the youngster drank without a change in expression. Their school hunk was indeed a ruthless character. They probably noticed that Bojio was looking at her phone. Someone couldn't help but ask, "Young Master Jio, what are you looking at? Why are you so engrossed?" "Nothing." Bojio closed the WeChat page and took another sip of beer. That person didn't think there was anything interesting on the phone. He couldn't understand why young Master Jio was looking at an empty WeChat screen. This meal. Bojio didn't eat much. She just sat there and drank silently. Because it was by the side of the road, anyone who drove would be able to see it as long as they opened the windows. When she opened the 4th bottle of beer, Bojio paused. Bojio paused for a moment. It wasn't because of anything else, but because of the familiar military Land Rover that was driving over. The car plate was unique and there was only one in the entire Jianghu city. Bojio recognized the car and so did her roommates. One of them blurted out, "Isn't that young Master Qin's car?" Only then did he realize something and shut his mouth. It was indeed a car Qin often took. The windows weren't closed. They could clearly see that handsome and aloof face. The driver noticed them and paused for a moment. "Young Master, it's young Master Jio." Qin glanced over at Bojio and said calmly, "Let's go." The driver was puzzled. Usually, young Master would ask young Master Jio to get in the car. But today, the roommates who were eating chicken were still thinking about young Master Qin's gaze. He must have looked over, but the next second, the Land Rover drove away. He turned back to look at the youngster's expression. Bojio didn't say anything. She retracted her gaze and ordered another bottle of beer. The roommates were dumbfounded. If they continued drinking, the lovelorn person would be fine, but all of them would collapse. Honestly, the school hunk was a little scary when he was lovelorn, On the other side, the Land Rover was still driving forward. It wasn't going fast. Firstly, the driver was still in shock. Secondly, his young master's gaze was on the rearview mirror. He didn't urge him to drive faster. Instead, he seemed to be waiting for someone. Chinamo was indeed waiting for someone. He glanced at the rearview mirror, hoping to see the youngster chasing after him. But he didn't. He had glanced at his phone countless times today. He had told himself that as long as that person sent him a message, regardless of what was important to her, he would try not to be too domineering. Once again, reality hit him. That person didn't care about him at all. Feelings were similar to multiplication. As long as one side was 0, the result would be 0. Chinamo tilted his head, his gaze lowered. The driver wasn't sure what his young master was thinking. He kept staring at the rearview mirror until they left the road. Then his gaze changed. However, it became even more lifeless. It was as though he had returned to the time when he had known young Master Jiu. He wasn't interested in anything. His emotions were indifferent. His gaze was indifferent too. This kind of young master was really worrying. The scenery outside the car window retreated. Time trickled by. Bo Jiu didn't continue drinking. She took out her wallet to settle the bill. She glanced at her roommate who was still vomiting in the corner. She stood there and lit another cigarette. She had never smoked so much before. Even when she was on her period, she would only smoke half a cigarette to relieve the pain. But it didn't seem right not to smoke. Perhaps she had never expected that person to treat her like an ordinary person, brushing past her with such an indifferent expression. Her heart tightened. This should be the lightest punishment. When the Almighty found out about her true identity, would he be 100 times colder? No one could predict it. She should do something else to stop herself from thinking about it. That way it wouldn't be so boring. It would be more natural for them to meet again in the National League. Bo Jiu knew that she wasn't being fair. But the Almighty might not know that he liked her in her high school facade. In reality, the real her wasn't that innocent. Underneath this facade, she was an international criminal. He had said that he would capture Z personally and send her to jail. Bo Jiu didn't regret taking this path. But sometimes she would think that it would be great if that person could accompany her on this path. But Bo Jiu knew that they were destined to walk different paths. Their methods were different. The Almighty followed the law. And she used her own methods. If it was possible, she hoped that in his heart she would be the person he wanted to separate from and not a criminal, Qin Group Club. Numerous laptops were switched on at the same time. A meeting was being held in the meeting room. Anyone with eyes could see that Bosch Qin's pressure was lower than any other day. It was probably too low. He wasn't even paying attention during the meeting. But to them it wasn't that bad. Other than the slight fear, everything else was fine. The moment the words "meeting" ended were heard, the managers fled the scene hurriedly. Feng Yi had wanted to talk to him about Little Spade, but from the looks of it, anyone who mentioned that name wouldn't have a good ending. Chapter 959. Chinamo still remembered when he received this lighter. He couldn't wait to hold it in his hand and play with it several times. He couldn't get enough of it and liked it no matter how much he looked at it. He didn't want anyone else to touch it except him. So he always carried it with him. Chinamo knew very well that the girl didn't know what day it was. From her wandering eyes, it could be seen that she had forgotten everything, and her guilty conscience could be seen. The next day she gave him such a thing. It was because the girl was the one who gave him the lighter that he couldn't bear to part with it. But at the end of the day he had used some tricks to get this gift from her. Chinmo's fingers tightened and his eyes deepened. Captain? Coco had just finished a live broadcast and was still wearing his uniform. He wanted to take advantage of the break to come in to rest and seek comfort from his captain. As the person who carried the external publicity of the entire team, Coco would sometimes appear in the company. But he hadn't seen manager Feng today, so he didn't know how Chinamo was feeling today. After hearing the sound, Chinamo glanced sideways. Coco sat on the sofa, his tiger teeth exposed. He reached out and tugged at his shirt. Captain, next time when you answer questions in the live broadcast, you and Little Spade should go. 80% of the people are asking me if you are really together. I said you are brothers, but they didn't believe me. I'm not good at lying, so I almost exposed you. Coco spoke for a while. Seeing that his captain didn't even look at him, he hopped over, holding a bag of yogurt in his mouth and looking at Chinamo. The captain didn't even look at him. He was holding something in his hand. Coco looked for a while. He really didn't understand what was so good about this little thing. Why would the captain look at it for so long? After drinking the yogurt, Coco threw the bag away and asked curiously, Captain, what is this? Coco's question seemed to finally pull Qin Mo's eyes back. Lighter. Qin Mo's voice was very calm, as if the thing in his hand was nothing special. Coco widened his eyes. This is a lighter? The shape? It looks good. Where did you buy it? Qin Mo remained silent. But even so, Coco didn't notice that his captain was in a bad mood. He continued to look at the pure silver lighter. The more he looked, the more he liked it. Let me try lighting a cigarette? Why are you lighting a cigarette? Qin Mo arched a brow and threw the cigarette lighter to the side. Such an ugly thing. Ugly? Coco looked at his captain's side profile. There was no emotion on it. The naive Coco thought that his captain simply didn't like the igniter. Captain, if you think it's ugly, give it to me. I think it looks good. When Qin Mo heard that, he lifted his eyes and glanced at Coco. Her gaze was so cold that Coco's scalp went numb. He thought he had said something wrong, and his left hand felt like it was frozen. What did the captain mean? He had already said that it was ugly. Doesn't that mean I don't like it? Why was she looking at him as if she wanted to chop off his hand in the next second? Just when Coco thought that the captain would say something to him, Coco's eyes widened. A cold and indifferent voice rang out again. Up to you. Up to you? Did the captain mean that he could take the lighter away? But that wasn't what the captain's gaze said. Coco confirmed again. Can I really take it away? Didn't I say up to you? Qin Mo sat on the sheepskin office chair. His slender and fair fingers flipped open the contract beside him. He had a handsome face, but there wasn't a trace of warmth in his voice. Instead, it was cold for no reason. Coco saw that his captain's expression was really unfriendly. He could only shut his mouth and tentatively reached out to touch the electronic lighter. Seeing that there wasn't any reaction, he gathered his courage and put it in his pocket. He turned to leave. Qin Mo, who was sitting on the office chair, paused for a moment. When he came back to his senses, the words came out of his mouth. Put it back. Coco turned back to look at his captain. His gaze was a little shocked. After all, his captain had never gone back on his words. After Qin Mo met Coco's gaze, his voice became faint. You can choose another one. Didn't you always like the mouse I used before? When Coco heard this, his focus immediately shifted. He put the lighter on the table and said excitedly, Captain means that I can take that mouse. And? Qin Mo said, holding the lighter in his hand again. Of course, Coco saw this scene. He was very puzzled. What did the captain think of this lighter? If he said it wasn't important, why did he treasure it so much? One had to know that the captain's mouse was a limited edition. Whether it was the feel or the appearance, it was first class. In the past, he wouldn't even let him touch it. Now, in order to keep the lighter, he directly abandoned the mouse. If he said it was important, just now the captain seemed to want to throw it away. What was going on? Before Coco could figure it out, he was picked up by Feng Yi, who came to arrange work. Along the way, Coco told everything he saw to their manager. He wanted Feng Yi to help him analyze what was going on. After listening, Manager Feng frowned even more. It seemed that he still had to have a good talk with those two people. In the CEO's office, without Coco, everything seemed unusually quiet. Qin Mo glanced at the lighter in his palm and slid open the phone screen. There was still no message in the WeChat dialog box. When Feng Yi pushed the door and walked in, this was the scene he saw. Since you want to contact him, why don't you call Little Spade directly? Hearing this, Qin Mo looked up at him, even his voice was cold. Is the company very free today? How could it be very busy? As a manager, Feng Yi still dared to say some things. If you continue like this, how are you going to play in the competition? Besides, Little Spade usually listens to you. Is there a misunderstanding? Qin Mo didn't say anything. Feng Yi continued, in a relationship there are some things that have to be said clearly. It's useless for you to sit here like this. Qin Mo sat back and pulled off his tie, full of abstinence. The door is behind you. That meant that he could go. Feng Yi shut his mouth but felt that it was necessary to clarify. What exactly are you angry about? This was a question without an answer. The man in front of him was still looking at the contract in his hands, cold and without a trace of space. Feng Yi knew that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of him even if he continued asking. He glanced at the lighter that Coco had mentioned. It was obviously too important, hence even though he was angry he didn't throw it away. It should be from Little Spade. It seemed like he had to put in more effort to find out the reason. As the manager of the club, he didn't just have to guard against his players dating outsiders, he also had to guard against them dating insiders. You don't have to worry about my condition. Feng Yi waited for Qin Imo to speak, but he didn't say the reason. Instead he said faintly, "There won't be any problems in the competition." At this point Feng Yi didn't know what else to say. He could only solve the problem from the side. To solve the problem from the side was to ask the other party. After leaving the office, the first thing Feng Yi did was to call Bojio. The youngster's phone went through but no one picked up. Feng Yi pressed his head, unaware that Bojio had drunk alcohol in the afternoon. Bojio drank around 10 bottles of Budweiser alone. After finishing, she returned to the dormitory and climbed onto the bed. She slept on the upper bunk, which was much quieter than the lower bunk. Classes started on Sunday afternoon. Bojio wasn't in the mood to go to class. She got on the bed, opened the quilt and covered her head with it. She listened to the sound of rain outside. The scene on the street was still replaying in her mind. From afar, that person had been sitting in a car. He had seen her but his gaze had been indifferent, as though she was just an ordinary person. Bojio froze, her heart clenched tightly. She couldn't fall asleep at first. But after the alcohol kicked in, drowsiness slowly crept over her. Her chest was still unable to accept the emptiness, as though she had lost something. Fortunately, alcohol was useful, it could help her sleep. Hence, the sleeping Bojio didn't hear her phone vibrating. Her roommates didn't dare to disturb her, but when the phone kept ringing, they guessed that something had happened. Thorny's roommates first looked at the caller ID. The name, Fox Phone, was especially eye-catching. But since it was the school hunk's phone, they didn't dare to touch it. They could only wait for the ringing to subside. The sleeping Bojio was dreaming. Her dreams were filled with scenes from her childhood. When she woke up, there was no one in the dormitory. Everyone had probably gone to class. Bojio lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling in a daze. During this period of time, Bojio had been with Qin Imo ever since that day. The sight of no one in the room when she opened her eyes had become rare. Because every time she woke up, there would be someone by her side. But now, it was obvious that she wouldn't be able to enjoy such treatment anymore. Bojio tilted her head. She was listless, her movements weren't as agile as before. Coincidentally, the headmaster had brought someone from the student council to check on the dormitory. Classes had started but there were still students sleeping in the dormitory. Coincidentally, the school director came to inspect the dormitory with people from the student union. Classes had already started, but there were still students sleeping in the dormitory. One could imagine that no matter who that person was, the headmaster's expression would not be too good. But because it was Bojio, he didn't punish her too harshly. Go to the field and do frog jumps. Go to class after you do 100. The headmaster wasn't bad. He was strict with the students but he treated them well. Bojio respected him even though she hadn't been to school. Moreover, she didn't want to be idle. When she reached the field, she squatted down, placed her hands behind her back and started to jump. Bojio's jump attracted the attention of many students. Look, isn't that the top student? Frog jumps on the first day of school? My Highness Jio is so unlucky to be caught by the devil. But what should we do with Highness Jio's cute and handsome jumping? Some of the students from the normal classes started to discuss openly. The teacher standing on the podium knocked heavily on the blackboard. Pull your attention back. It seemed like she would have to discuss with the headmaster. Even if she wanted to punish someone, she couldn't do it on the field. It was too eye-catching. It was indeed eye-catching. With Bojio's silver hair and face, it was rare to see her jumping with her hands behind her back. It was no wonder people wanted to see it. But as the saying went, enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Number 1 middle school and number 2 middle school were close to each other. Even though the useless number 2 middle school's field wasn't as big as number 1 middle school's field. However, the two fields were also next to each other, separated by a net. It was common for middle year 2 youngsters to be punished. However, the moment he stepped out, he saw Bojio bouncing on the number 1 middle school field. Instantly he became excited. He didn't even care about the teacher who was hitting him with a book. He ran over and asked Bojio, "Hey, what were you punished for?" Bojio didn't reply. The teenager continued, "Let me tell you, I'm being punished unjustly this time. Do you still remember when I asked you to play for me to confirm my relationship with my girlfriend? I just went to your number 1 middle school and gave my girlfriend lunch. I even used the roses planted in the school to prove my innocence. Not only did your director get angry when he saw me, he even punished me." Bojio slowed down. She glanced at him and said slowly, "That's a good punishment. I can't stand people like you who show affection everywhere." The number 2 middle school youngster. It took time for the frog to jump. The school hunk of number 1 middle school and the boss of number 2 middle school were punished at the same time. But one of them was clean and handsome from start to finish. The other one was hit on the head by the headmaster. Shui Yaoyao saw the scene too. She placed the pencil in her hand aside, her gaze on the youngster didn't retract. The school had to pass the test in order to successfully participate in the National League. Hence, Bojio had always been cooperative. The headmaster was satisfied with the youngster's attitude and didn't call his parents. Bojio was also glad that his parents weren't notified. After all, Qin Mo's name was written in her contact list. But after this time, even if he was notified, he probably wouldn't come. Bojio sat on the edge of the field. Bojio sat at the edge of the field, using the back of her hand to wipe the sweat that was dripping down her sharp chin. The fangirls couldn't control themselves. The teachers probably knew that no one was listening to this class. Everyone's attention was on the field. But Bojio's attention was on her phone. She couldn't be too presumptuous in front of the headmaster. She found a secluded place and wanted to call manager phone. Chapter 960. The Japanese? The team that Hoshino was in? Alright, I'll be there in a while. Bojio stood up. She had just done her frog jumps and her legs weren't as nimble. She knocked on the phone but didn't reply immediately. Brother Imo, are you there? Feng Yi glanced over at Qin Imo, who was putting on his uniform. He lowered his voice. I'm here. Bojio paused, listening to the faint voice from the other end of the phone. Who are you talking to? He didn't know why he felt guilty, so he directly hung up the phone. Feng Yi listened to the busy tone meeting Qin Mo's gaze. His gaze was calm, carrying an indescribable depth. With Bosch Qin's intelligence, he must have guessed who was on the other end. But for some reason he didn't seem to understand. Bosch Qin lowered his head and adjusted his sleeves, asking. Feng Yi coughed lightly. It's Little Spade, the Japanese are here and they have to gather the entire team. Qin Imo didn't say anything else. As a manager who understood his team members' thoughts, Feng Yi added, Little Spade said she'll be here in a while. Qin Imo stuffed a hand into his pocket, arching a brow. Oh. She's so scared that she hung up on you. Are you sure she'll be here in a while? Feng Yi coughed again. This time it wasn't intentional but he really choked. He lowered his voice. You've been waiting for her news the entire day. I asked you to contact her but you didn't. Bosch Qin, why do you have to do this? Qin Imo glanced at him. When he spoke again his voice was hoarse. I just wanted to know my position in her heart. Now it's clear. Feng Yi opened his mouth. The words were at the tip of his tongue but he couldn't say them. He had never seen Qin Imo in such a state. Even though he was still standing when he glanced out of the window, there was a sense of desolation. Feng Yi understood that whoever started the trouble had to end it. He still had to wait for Little Spade. Let's go. Qin Imo picked up the cigarette lighter on his desk. The collar of his pure black uniform was flipped up, revealing his chiseled and cold handsome face. Feng Yi heaved a long sigh and rubbed his head. On the other side, it wasn't convenient for Bojio to apply for leave the moment she finished her frog jumps. Fortunately, Yao Yao was there to testify for her. It was something that happened in the club. Otherwise, with the suspicious gaze of the headmaster, Bojio would really have to climb over the wall if she wanted to come out. The two of them took a taxi. They didn't have time to change into their combat uniforms, so they put on their school uniforms. It wasn't far from the school to the club. Bojio glanced down at her phone. She knew the problem wasn't with the medicine. In fact, the Almighty had restrained himself every time he wanted her because he was afraid of hurting her. She knew very well what the problem was. However, there were some things that could not be said. Moreover, she was about to leave. Bojio swiped the screen before sliding it back. Shui Yaoyao obviously noticed that the person sitting next to her wasn't in the right state of mind. She called out softly, Your Highness Jio. Bojio glanced over. What is it? Is something the matter? Shui Yaoyao asked directly. Bojio paused for a moment before smiling. Nothing much, I made a mistake and am reflecting on it. Face the wall in front of my phone and reflect? Shui Yaoyao didn't understand. Bojio glanced at the WeChat page again, thinking about how the person she was going to meet would treat her like a stranger. Her eyes dimmed and her silver hair drooped down. Shui Yaoyao paused. She didn't look like she was fine. But that was probably how Bojio was. When there was no one around, no matter how lazy and dispirited she was, it wouldn't affect her devilish nature. Hence, when she reached the club, she saw a baby-faced person pointing at her. That's the guy I'm going to PK with. Bo Jio swept him a glance, her voice nonchalant. Who are you? The baby-faced person's eyes widened. How can you not know who I am? Are you very handsome? Why should I know you? Bo Jio walked forward, her gaze sweeping over the baby-faced person's combat uniform. She arched a brow. The baby-faced person noticed her gaze, straightening his body. You should know now, I just defeated one of your members. How is it? Do you want to PK with me? Bo Jio paused, a hint of a smile on her face. I'm the first official member of our team to arrive. Is there anything to be proud of when the Japanese's first member defeated our reserve team? Bo Jio seemed to be more lethal when she wasn't in a good mood, even her words were sharper than usual. Shui Yaoyao thought, Her Highness Jio must have spent a lot of time with the Almighty, her venomous tongue must have picked up at least 80% of her skills. The baby-faced person's face flushed red. Unfortunately, he had only fought with reserve team members, he hadn't fought with an official member of Supreme Alliance. With Bo Jio's words, he felt a suffocation in his chest, unable to take it down. At this moment, a chuckle came from the sky. Isn't that easy? Let's find an official member to PK and see Supreme Alliance's strength. It was Watanabe. As he spoke, he glanced at Yu Cixin. Captain, am I right? Yu Cixin still had his long hair, but there wasn't a hint of femininity. When he glanced at Bo Jio, his gaze deepened. He yawned lazily. Watanabe, how many times do you want me to repeat myself? Supreme Alliance is the club's decision, it's just an exchange, not a competition. Watanabe wanted to continue, but Bo Jio saw his gaze deepen. Bo Jio watched as the pretty boy's gaze deepened. With a lazy tone, he said, In China, only the national champion has the right to compete with us. With that, Bo Jio glanced at the person. Mei Nan smiled at her and walked over. As he brushed past her, he said, I'm curious. What's your relationship with Hoshino? Why does he pay so much attention to you? Bo Jio glanced up, her lips lifting. Yu Cixin waited for the youngster to speak. Just then, a familiar voice came from behind. You can ask me if you want to know. Captain, when did you start being so nosy? Yu Cixin turned towards the person who spoke. He was wearing the same uniform as him, his brows clear but his gaze was filled with warning. Yu Cixin chuckled. Alright, tell me, what do you see in him? I admire his gaming skills. Hoshino glanced at Yu Cixin. I've said that before. Yu Cixin knew that Hoshino was starting to get unhappy. He didn't want to test his limits, so he stuffed his hands into his pockets. It's just a joke, why are you so serious? Mr. Yu Cixin might have gone overboard with his joke. Another voice rang out. It was faint, slightly cold and had a unique feel to it. Bo Jio didn't turn. She felt a warmth coming from her wrist with a faint fragrance and a hint of tobacco. The familiar scent surrounded her along with the warmth. The next second she saw the beautiful curve of his jaw. My teammate doesn't know your teammate, Chinamo said, glancing down at her. He glanced down at Bo Jio. It's better not to make some jokes, don't you think? Bo Jio caught a glimpse of something else in his eyes, but before she could get a clear look, the Almighty shifted his gaze away. At the same time he also let go of her wrist. His side profile was indeed as she had imagined, indifferent without a trace of warmth. Lin Feng, who didn't know how to read people's expressions, leaped over and said to Bo Jio, Little Spade, what's going on with you and Captain? Why is he treating you differently? Is he starting to feel bored and cold towards you? Don't worry, if Captain dares to abandon you, I'll stand by your side even if I have to take the risk of rebelling. Lin Feng's voice was soft, only the two of them could hear him. Bo Jio remained silent. Lin Feng felt that this matter had to be changed. Look at me, I'm so responsible. After sleeping with Yun Hu, I immediately told the surrounding people to stop having any ideas about me. I'm going to have a family in the future, you have to let Captain know about this so that you can take the initiative. Bo Jio had mentioned that she hated people who showed off their affection the most. She glanced over, her tone calm. You're the one who takes the initiative? Your lips are already torn, your words aren't convincing. If you don't have the strength to resist Almighty Yun's kisses, just say it, I won't laugh at you. Lin Feng was dealt a huge blow. He took out his phone and hurriedly looked at his lips. If *CK was really torn. Didn't Yun Hu know how to restrain himself? How was he going to brag like this? Don't tell me you're like this in bed? Bo Jio's final attack successfully petrified Lin Feng. When he regained his senses, Lin Feng watched the youngster's back view, his heart stifled. Why were some people like this when they were in a bad mood? Little Bo Jio wasn't happy. Ever since she entered, he hadn't even glanced at her. Qin Imo walked in front, his hands in his pockets clenched for a moment before relaxing again. His indifferent gaze met Hoshino's face. They stood in different positions, their gazes intersecting. Feng Yi noticed the change in the situation, speaking with a smile. Since it's just an exchange and not a competition, let's sit down and have a chat. Our friends from the media have been looking forward to the Japanese's arrival. Yusishin stilled, breaking into a smile. We won't be used to it if there are too many reporters. Feng Yi had expected him to say that, his lips lifting. Mr. Yusishin, don't worry, the Qin group has a media business. It's just an exchange, not a press conference like you are imagining. Yusishin narrowed his eyes. He had originally wanted to use the exchange as an excuse to take a closer look at Supreme Alliance's strengths. He hadn't expected them to use this as an excuse. It was no wonder Supreme Alliance was the wealthiest team in the industry. Supreme Alliance's manager was indeed an unscrupulous businessman. Actually, that wasn't the only reason Feng Yi had called the media over. It was because of Qin Mo's abnormal state. The media was there to remind Boss Qin that even if they had a conflict, it couldn't be displayed in front of other teams. Both of them were able to keep their composure. But because of their composure, Feng Yi was worried they would explode. After all, no one had ever been able to guess young Master Qin's thoughts correctly. A meeting between two teams, one of which was the Japanese, would be newsworthy. Even if the entire Japanese team wasn't present, Hoshino and Yusishin represented the entire Japanese team. Their captain and vice-captain were world-class esports experts who rarely showed their faces. Every word would become a headline in esports. The doll-faced man couldn't be rash even if he wanted to compete with Bojio. Both teams were good-looking. Even if there was enmity between them, it wouldn't be displayed at such a moment. Etiquette was a basic rule of etiquette for both teams. Hence it was a real exchange. Bojio wasn't interested in conversing. She sat very close to Hoshino and turned to glance at him. Hoshino could guess what she wanted to ask, sending a message over. I found out about Rao Rong, I'll send you the information when I get back. Bojio replied, okay. The receptionist walked over with a tray of fruits and tea. Feng Yi had arranged for this to be a friendly gesture. But the moment the receptionist placed the tray in front of Bojio, Hoshino interrupted. Hoshino suddenly said, she doesn't eat peaches. In that instant, the receptionist wasn't the only one who froze. Even Lin Feng and the others turned towards Hoshino. How did he know Little Spade didn't eat peaches? They had interacted with Little Spade for so long and yet, he didn't seem to eat peaches. After all, Little Spade wasn't a picky eater. Hoshino seemed familiar with something they didn't know. Even though Lin Feng was naive, he was still sensitive to such matters. Did they know each other? That was his first reaction. On Qin Mo's side, the hand holding the teacup froze. He lifted his eyes and looked at the youngster indifferently. Bojio knew she couldn't let the Almighty see through her. Hence, she reached for a peach slice and placed it in her mouth. In the past, she hadn't been able to eat peaches as they would break out in rashes. But this was different. Bojio lowered her lids, swallowing the peach slice before taking a sip of tea. Hoshino's reaction was quick. He smiled naturally and added, Watanabe, did you forget how you said it wasn't nutritious the last time you ate peaches? Watanabe pointed to himself. Was that true? It seemed like there was, so he nodded. Everyone was enlightened. So he was referring to Watanabe. They had assumed Hoshino was referring to Little Spade. It was a beautiful misunderstanding. Qin Imo retracted his gaze. But he didn't release his grip. He knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. There was someone who knew him better than him. Or perhaps. Chapter 961. Qin Mo's gaze turned cold. There was an obvious change in the atmosphere. His pitch-black eyebrows were raised and his expression was frosty. Sitting beside him was Lin Feng, the one who didn't know how to read people's expressions. He turned towards Hoshino. I heard from Mr. Hoshino that you admire our Little Spade? Hoshino didn't avoid the question. Instead, he turned to Bojio and smiled faintly. Yes. When Hoshino said the word, yes, Qin Mo's gaze deepened. Lin Feng still wanted to ask something, but he was stunned by the cold aura emanating from his captain. He could only shrink his head back. But even if Lin Feng didn't ask, it didn't mean Hoshino wouldn't continue. He seemed to have something to say to his fans since there were reporters around. I've watched every single one of Spade Z's matches. Be it in terms of skill or character, he is worthy of a battle with the Japanese. At the same time, I hope Supreme Alliance can win the National League, which is also the reason I came to Supreme Alliance. I want to have a match with him. The Japanese vice-captain thought so highly of him. If this video was broadcasted, to a certain extent, it would definitely reduce the existence of some anti-fans. After all, Hoshino's words were right there. His fans would also treat Spade Z as a decent opponent. Most importantly, it was time for some people to calm down. Even Hoshino recognized Spade Z's ability. Those who had been saying that Bojio had gotten to where she was because of their relationship had to think twice before they spoke, even if they weren't willing to admit it. Japan's influence in the esports industry. The strongest player in Asia had never failed before. Even the video of Hoshino's 1v3 against Xiangnan team was still on the internet. Almost everyone knew that he was a very low-key person. For him to give such an evaluation to Spade Z, most of the rumors would collapse on their own. Sensing the value of the news, the media at the scene immediately started a live broadcast. After all, they didn't expect Hoshino to admire a newcomer so much. For some reason, Feng Yi felt that it was dangerous to continue this topic. He glanced at his boss's side profile and forcefully changed the topic. Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Hoshino. Supreme Alliance will fight well in the upcoming finals. It seems like Supreme Alliance is confident in themselves. The person who said this was Yu Cixin. When he smiled, he gave off a dangerous vibe like that of a wild leopard. When he said this, he looked at Chinamo. If Hoshino wanted to play against Spade Z, he wanted to see just how powerful the legendary 3000 knife cutting was. Watching other people's matches, one could only see the surface. If one didn't fight personally, how would one know who was stronger? Facing such a gaze, Chinmo's handsome face didn't change at all. It seemed as though no matter what Yu Cixin said, it wouldn't affect him. This made Yu Cixin raise his eyebrows. He really wanted to fight with this team that made Hoshino look at them in a different light. On one hand, he wanted to understand why Hoshino was so interested in this team. On the other hand, he knew that Chinmo's win rate was higher than his in the individual competition records. Chinmo's name had once been a legend in the esports industry. They had thought that they would be able to compete with this person back then, but they didn't expect Supreme Alliance to not even make it to the national finals. Therefore, it wasn't difficult for the Japanese to win that match. At that time, some of the seniors were still glad that Supreme Alliance didn't participate. But in his eyes, Hoshino was the person he wanted to study the most. As for Chinamo, he was a suitable opponent. Yu Cixin lifted the edge of his lips. The reporters filmed the scene and pulled the topic back to Hoshino. Almighty Hoshino admires Spade so much, but he doesn't seem to have interacted with Spade before? Hoshino laughed, taking out his phone and showing them the screen. I followed him, but Spade hasn't replied. I'm still waiting. You really followed him? Why didn't they know? The reporters at the scene felt that their ability to capture news was terrible. Unbeknownst to them, Hoshino had added him before he came to the club. It was to make everything seem logical. Bojio, who was familiar with him, understood his thoughts quickly. Even without any verbal communication, just a glance was enough to know what he was thinking, making everything seem logical. Bojio smiled. I don't usually use the official Weibo account, I'm going to reply now. With that, she took out her phone, her slender and fair fingers unlocking the screen. After logging in, she clicked on the latest follow. It was a simple exchange of fans, but it immediately caused a wave of discussion online. Especially Hoshino's fans. My almighty Hoshino actually follows other teams? That doesn't make sense. Who is this Spadesy? I've never heard of him. Is he from our country? I just went to search. He's the FC King of China's Zone C, Supreme Alliance's super rookie. Almighty Hoshino is interested in him? Previous poster, don't go off topic. I think it's a friendly follow. When has Almighty Hoshino ever followed others? I didn't see him like this during the International League. Take a look at the interview online. Almighty Hoshino said he wants to have a good match with Spade Z. He must be strong if he can attract Almighty Hoshino's interest. I've decided to take a look at this Chinese player. Faced with the sudden visit, the fans of Spade official fan club were a little confused, but that didn't stop them from welcoming him in a friendly manner. In an instant, Bojio's negative comments on the internet lessened. After all, Hoshino was the first to follow Bojio. With the addition of the interview, the topic of discussion soared. The media seized on this point, hoping for more interaction between Bojio and Hoshino. Lin Feng, who was sitting beside Chinamo, felt a chill starting from his neck. Even his scalp felt numb. It wasn't because of anything else, but his captain's grip on the teacup tightened, his eyes losing the last bit of warmth. Lin Feng saw with his own eyes that a layer of frost covered that handsome face in an instant. Qin Mo looked in the direction of the two, his cold and noble side profile expressionless. His gaze was deep and unmoving. Lin Feng could understand his captain's feelings. Hoshino was treating Little Spade too well. But according to Little Spade, wasn't his captain starting to give Little Spade the cold shoulder? Why did he care so much? Lin Feng felt that the relationship between two men was even more complicated than the relationship between a straight man and a woman. He couldn't analyze it, so he just shrunk his neck and acted as the background. This was to prevent the captain from giving him a look when he said something wrong and letting him experience it himself. Fortunately, the interview wasn't long. If not, Lin Feng suspected that the teacup would be crushed by his captain. Yu Cixin was the first to stand up. He stuffed a hand into his pocket and looked at Qin Mo. I hope the next time we meet Supreme Alliance, it will be on an esports competition. By the way, Mr. Qin, have you thought of a way to deal with Xiangnan? Your team doesn't seem to be mature. The competition is about skills, not maturity. Qin Mo's voice was calm. His words stopped Yu Cixin from probing further. He smiled. Just as he was about to turn his head and ask Hoshino to leave, he saw that the tripod was showing signs of loosening. It looked like it was about to fall. Bojio and Hoshino were still standing under the tripod. Qin Mo had obviously noticed it earlier than Yu Cixin because the moment Yu Cixin's pupils constricted, Qin Mo had already moved. What he hadn't expected was that at that moment the youngster moved as well. The youngster moved as well. Her movements were extremely fast, just like what he had seen countless times. Whether it was her landing or her focus, they were all beautiful, including her reaching out to grab Hoshino's wrist and stepping to the side, using her back to block him. It was reflected in Qin Mo's eyes. At that moment he remembered the start of the Cold War. He hadn't taken the initiative to look for her ever since. He hadn't taken the initiative to call or send any messages either. When he saw her, he would brush past her. He wouldn't even smile as a passerby. But she definitely didn't know. He was in so much pain. Because in her eyes there was someone more important. There was a dull thud. Qin Mo's shoulder withstood the pressure. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Even the staff member who was originally in charge of the camera showed a terrified expression. No one had expected the camera to malfunction. Everyone's face was pale. They covered their mouths as they watched the scene unfold. When Bojio heard the noise, she turned over and saw the Almighty standing behind her, blocking the thing for her. He looked into her eyes, his thick brows furrowed slightly from the pain. His aura was burning brightly. His eyes were as clear and deep as the sea, tinged with a faint ink that could drown a person. His handsome face gradually turned pale under the light. The paler his skin was, the harder it was for people to look away from him. It was as though she could see his thoughts through his skin. Bojio suddenly realized something. She let go of Hoshino and stood up, opening her mouth to explain. Qin Mo had already kicked the camera away, heading towards the exit, leaving her with nothing but coldness. This time Bojio didn't hesitate. She chased after him. Hoshino chuckled, straightening himself and turning to the dumbfounded crowd. I never expected Spade Z to be so skilled in real life. Fortunately, Hoshino was there to smooth things over. Otherwise, Feng Yi wouldn't know how to continue the conversation. The Japanese had met with an accident in their territory. If the news got out, the consequences would be dire. Right now, Feng Yi was thankful for Little Spade's subconscious action. If it had been the other way around and Hoshino had protected Little Spade, Supreme Alliance would have been embroiled in a series of fights between anti-fans. The consequences would have been dire. Yu Cixin's emotions had already changed. He immediately rushed over and pulled Hoshino over. His voice was a little deep. How are you? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Hoshino turned, smiling faintly at Feng Yi. Fortunately, Spade was here, help me thank her. Yu Cixin's gaze dimmed. He glanced at the camera, his expression dark. But that was it. The media reports were basically about an accident during the interview and how Spade Z had protected Hoshino. Feng Yi's situation was much easier to deal with, but he was more worried about young Master Qin's health. Even if he hadn't used much strength, the back of young Master Qin's shoulder should have been red. But that wasn't the main point. The main point was young Master Qin's back view, which seemed to have lost all his warmth. But what Feng Yi didn't expect was that even so, that person still maintained a trace of rationality. No, that wasn't right, it wasn't rationality, it was more like digging 3 feet into the ground to find a person. Because when he received the call, the voice on the other side of the phone was extremely cold. Go check who touched the camera's tripod. I'll go check the video now. Feng Yi knew that this happened because of his incompetence as a manager. But he didn't expect such a problem to happen in the Qin Group Club. After all, no one in Jianghu City dared to do such things in front of the Qin family. But Feng Yi wasn't sure if this incident was targeted at the Supreme Alliance or Little Spade. But no matter which one it was targeted at, in young Master Qin's eyes, it was probably a death sentence. Other than Qin Mo, it was obvious that Hoshino and Yu Cixin had realized something. The former was worried that this attack was targeted at Z. She had experienced too many similar incidents and was worried that this attack was targeted at Z. The latter was born in a country, his beast-like instincts made it hard for him not to think of conspiracies. But Yu Cixin knew that such a childish attack wouldn't be targeted at his identity. That position was either to disqualify Hoshino or to disqualify Spade Z. Based on the current situation, the latter was more likely. If Spade Z and Qin Mo hadn't blocked it, Yu Cixin would have suspected Supreme Alliance. But on second thought, if one of them was injured here, Supreme Alliance would suffer the greatest loss. Hence, this attack was definitely targeted at Spade Z. Yu Cixin raised a brow. With the youngster's skills, he could have easily avoided the tripod, but because he was afraid Hoshino would be injured, he used his back to block it. Was this really Spade Z's reaction after analyzing the pros and cons and not his instinct? If it was instinct, Hoshino and this Spade Z? Yu Cixin narrowed his eyes. He didn't know that Hoshino was hiding something from him. Time trickled by. Bojio rushed out and watched as the person hung up the phone. Without turning back, she held onto the railing with one hand and jumped over. But the person was already in the car and didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Bojio rushed over, her long legs blocking the car door. Her eyes were dark and she was about to speak. Chapter 962. Bojio managed to stop him with much difficulty. Of course, she wasn't going to let him leave just like that. Brother Moi, your instinctive reaction wasn't bad, Qin Mo said, his gaze deep and his voice cold. Qin Mo spoke again, his gaze deep and his voice cold. Should I be asking you how you met Hoshino? I don't even know you can't eat peaches. How many things have you been hiding from me? Do you want me to tell you everything? Every time I don't contact you, you don't take the initiative to contact me either. You do what you want to do and aren't affected by anything. I'm different. Every time I'm in a meeting, I'm thinking about what this person is doing. Why isn't she coaxing me? As long as she sends a word, even if it's just a phone call, a lot of things can be changed. In the end, you just don't want to reconcile, right? Bojio's fingers froze. She didn't know how to reply because the Almighty had hit the nail on the head. Qin Mo glanced at her and slowly turned his face. His black hair hung down, blocking his eyes. No one could see his expression. Since you don't want to be close to me, we will separate as you wish. Both of us probably don't like people who cling to us. Clingy, these 4 words. Bojio lost most of her energy. But instead of saying it for Bojio, it was more appropriate to say it was for himself. Sometimes, even with all his sincerity and hard work, it only proved that the other party didn't care. Especially after witnessing the scene just now. Qin Mo reached out to close the car door. After a moment of silence, his voice was cold. Drive. The driver wasn't from the same family. When he started the car, he didn't dare to look behind him. The coldness emanating from Boss Qin seemed to be able to freeze him. Bojio watched as the black Land Rover disappeared into the parking lot. After a long time, she walked out, her steps getting heavier. It was as though she had returned to her younger days. She had wanted to be alone but had been forced to leave with her father. She wanted to bend down because it wouldn't hurt so much. But Bojio knew that to her, she could bend over anything except her waist. The burden she carried wouldn't allow her to do that. Bojio inhaled deeply, leaning against the wall for a while. She wanted to smoke but realized there was only a lollipop in her pocket. It was the one the Almighty had bought for her. Bojio took it out and held it in her hands. She thought she would never forget it. There was a woman who always kept 2 candies in her coat pocket because she liked candy. He was clearly such a cold and noble person who never ate sweets. Bojio reached out and pressed down on her silver fringe. When she opened her eyes again, there was an obvious change in her pupils. He pressed the familiar string of numbers on his phone. Hoshino, who was standing beside Yu Cixin, took a step back. I'm going to relieve myself. Yu Cixin raised his eyebrows and said with an indescribable evil aura, "Be careful." Hoshino glanced at him. Got it. This person always treated others like porcelain dolls. It was interesting. Crossing the corridor, Hoshino took out the vibrating phone from his pocket and placed it beside his ear. Hello, Z. Who knows about your team coming today? Bojio's questions were always direct. Hoshino knew what she was getting at. The reason should be within Supreme Alliance. Our visit was decided by Captain at the last minute and the other members aren't aware of it yet. Hence, the person who tampered with the camera must be someone from here. Other than the cameraman, the only person in charge is the floor supervisor. But from the looks of it, the person must have escaped. After the disguise, it would be hard to leave a trace even with the camera. Bojio was calm. That organization has their eyes on Supreme Alliance. More accurately, they have their eyes on me but they wouldn't know I'm Z. Which means someone is trying to drag me down to deal a heavy blow to Supreme Alliance. I'm sure you have found out what exactly happened to Chinamo, right from the start? Bojio had wanted to know why her puppy had lost his memory. Now she wanted to know even more. Her intuition told her that the terrorist organization's main target this time was the Almighty. Hoshino chuckled lightly. Z, you're as sharp as ever. I did find some information regarding Chinamo and the person who impersonated you. They knew each other and almost became lovers. Hoshino chuckled lightly. Z, you're as sharp as ever. Lovers? Bojio's fingers stilled, her gaze wavering. Hoshino's voice was still ringing in her ears. But for some reason, Chinamo started to treat this person coldly. It could even be said that he hated her. Bojio lowered her voice. That isn't strange. According to the Almighty, he wouldn't tolerate a criminal who hacked into someone else's computer. It has nothing to do with that. Hoshino paused when he heard the voice. Do you want to hear my analysis? Mamage? Hoshino sighed inwardly when he heard the dispirited reply. He broke into a faint smile. Z, it's such a waste of your intelligence. You're really clueless when it comes to relationships. Before she could open her mouth, Hoshino continued. Chinmo's matter is covered up deeply. Even with your identity, the information we can find is limited. That means we are only looking at the surface. What happened to Chinmo is something only he knows, so the theory of lovers doesn't hold water. The main point is Z, the person who impersonated you this time, her brother was dealt with by you. At that time, someone exposed the hacker's hidden information to some powerful people, using the internet to control people's thoughts, just like the maiden's sacrifice. Even though the method is different, the truth is the same, distorting the truth and causing people to lose their bottom line. An entire school of students to a certain extent become people who can harm others at any time, but they don't know it. Do you still remember what you said at the time? The scariest thing isn't the devil but the human heart. Bojio glanced up, her gaze deepening. So it's him. Hoshino paused. Back then, you and Chinmo worked together to send her brother to prison. Now that she's back, her target is Chinmo, revenge. Bojio's handsome face was especially distinct under the sunlight. Her brother killed many people. It seems like she has inherited his legacy. Hoshino glanced out the window. It wasn't just revenge, she was even more vicious than her brother. She wanted Chinmo. In order to get what she wanted, she destroyed everything around her. Human lives weren't important to her, the dignity and innocence of others were just tools to be used. The maiden's sacrifice had destroyed too many people. Her first target wasn't the young lady you saved but Shui Yaoyao from your team. At that time, she created a small forum to discuss Shui Yaoyao's actions. Back then, she created a small forum to discuss Shui Yaoyao. Her target was always those who were still working hard. You should understand what her brother and she wanted to destroy. They wanted to control the world because that is how human nature is. But back then she was just testing, a small test that caused Shui Yaoyao to be wronged for a few months. After that, she made her move in Tokyo. When she felt that it was about time, she came to China and started the official maiden's sacrifice. Z, this world shouldn't be like this. Some people clench their teeth and live their lives. They can't speak the truth after being oppressed because the moment they speak, people will jump out to oppose them. There are others who commit murder, commit arson, steal other people's hard work, steal other people's works, they will be forgiven. It won't be like this forever, Bojio interrupted. If not, what's the point of our existence? That's right. Hoshino laughed, his eyes bright and his teeth white. It won't be like this forever, so it's time for us to take action. What do you intend to do with Li Shui? She definitely won't admit to her crimes and those who don't care about plagiarism will try their best to clear her name. Bojio raised her hand, shielding her eyes from the glaring sunlight. When you weren't around, I hired a good lawyer. His surname is Bai and he has never lost a case. If Li Shui doesn't admit to her crimes, we will sue her until she does. Her mother knows that even if she wins the case, the compensation would be minimal. Based on Li Shui's personality, she might not even apologize and the people who scolded her will continue to scold her. But that isn't important. What's important is that the people who care about her know that there is still justice in this world. They protected the most important thing for the person they love. That person can finally rest in peace. It's strange that you hired a lawyer. Hoshino stuffed a hand into his pocket. It seems like Chinemo has affected you quite a bit. Z, do you like him? At first, Hoshino assumed that the person on the other end would hesitate, even if it was just for a second. But she didn't. When she spoke, there wasn't a hint of hesitation. Yes, I like him a lot. I want to kidnap him and bring him back to the Fifth Avenue. Fortunately, I'm still rational and didn't carry out the plan. But I don't know if I can control myself in the future. She was so honest that he didn't know how to reply. Hoshino supported his forehead with his long and fair fingers, his lips lifting. In that moment he didn't know how to reconcile his feelings. The person who had always been a loner finally had someone she liked. But that person wasn't him. Hoshino inhaled deeply. Z, don't torture us single dogs. But we won't be together. Hoshino didn't know how to reply to her next words. He's from the police and I'm an international criminal. In the movies, princes and princesses are always together, which prince and evil dragon are together. The prince will only kill the evil dragon but the Almighty won't kill me. I'm so handsome, he won't want to see me or hide far away from me. It was worse than this. Bojio didn't tell Hoshino her last sentence. Instead she changed the topic. Do you have a photo of that person? Hoshino knew who she was referring to even without Bojio's explanation. There are only some blurry ones. She is like her brother, never leaving behind any photos. But do you remember the address you gave me previously? It's an internet cafe beside Chinmo's university. She should be staying nearby. She might even be staying in school. Bojio's eyes twitched. She rented a house outside but doesn't stay there. When she isn't on a mission, she stays in school. Even if she is on a mission, the school's network would be more convenient since the public IP isn't easy to locate. Hoshino caressed his phone. You think she's a student? 90%. Bojio glanced down at the lollipop in her right hand. If she's a student, it would be a useful disguise for her. Besides, the university isn't far from number 1 middle school, making it easier for her to locate her target and help her. More importantly, it's Chinmo's school. You mentioned that if she wants to get him, the best way would be to become his schoolmate or join Supreme Alliance like I did. There are only 2 females in Supreme Alliance, me and Yao Yao. That eliminates the possibility of her being in Supreme Alliance. The only other possibility left is that she's his schoolmate. Hoshino retracted his gaze from the window. I understand what you mean. I'll focus on the investigation. Someone is coming, take care of yourself. I'm hanging up. MMH. Bojio hung up. She glanced at the phone screen. She resisted the urge to call Chinemo. She continued to use the method to keep herself busy. But this time, while she was busy, Hoshino's words kept flashing through her mind. They had almost become lovers. Which meant that the Almighty knew her. But the Almighty seemed to have forgotten about it. How did that happen? What exactly happened back then? Since Hoshino hadn't been able to find anything, she could only hack into the data of some special forces. And since that person liked to impersonate her so much, she could only use her own methods to prove who was the real one. Now that she knew her target was the Almighty, she couldn't let that person continue to roam free. She had to settle this matter before she left. Even if the Almighty didn't want to talk to her anymore, the sun moved west. The black Land Rover didn't drive back to the Chin family's house. Instead it stopped at a bar. The bar was near the school. Chinemo didn't look at his injured back. He sat at the bar counter, tugged his tie and ordered a row of drinks. The driver had already been sent away. Chinemo didn't show much emotion even when he was drinking. But his elegant and handsome side profile was clearly much colder. He drank one glass after another, as though that was the only way his back wouldn't hurt so much. He thought that the guy must not have even noticed that he was injured. Because at that moment she probably only had Hoshino in her eyes. Chinemo laughed softly. His lips were slightly lifted, but there wasn't a hint of a smile. Instead, there was a sense of decadence and loneliness. Chapter 963. In the darkest corner of the bar, a girl came in after Qin Mo. She sat there and watched Qin Mo for a long time before breaking into a sweet smile. She walked towards Qin Mo with her beautiful eyes. "Senior Qin, I didn't expect to meet you here." Qin Mo shifted his gaze away from the wine glass, sweeping her a glance. He didn't say a word. "You should have forgotten my name. The last time I almost fell down the stairs, you were the one who supported me from behind." The girl tilted her head. She was wearing a skirt and had short hair. Her fingers were slender and looked like a cello player. She smiled at Qin Mo as though she wasn't bothered by his coldness. "I'm Fan Jia, senior brother Qin, remember me this time." Qin Mo remained silent, pushing his glass over, gesturing for the bartender to continue. Fan Jia chuckled lightly. She stood at the side, her eyes bright and teeth white. "Senior Qin, you don't look happy. Do you want to say it? It will make you feel better." In that instant, something surged in Qin Mo's mind. He looked at the girl and found her familiar. She had short hair and the same face shape as that fellow. But her eyes weren't like that fellow's. They were extremely dark and clear like water. He started to think about that fellow again. Little Fujio who haunted him. That fellow who looked like a multiplication table. Qin Mo furrowed his brows. He was supposed to be impatient, but there was a hint of warmth in his eyes when he thought of someone. "Senior Qin, what's wrong with your back? Are you injured?" Fan Jia reached out. Qin Mo glanced over, his gaze icy. "It doesn't seem to have anything to do with you." Fan Jia blushed but didn't get angry. "I'm just worried about you." When Qin Mo heard this, he stood up, picked up his jacket and made a call. He didn't know who he was calling, but he said faintly, "I drank too much, come and pick me up." Lin Feng was baffled when he picked up the call. After all, he never thought that his captain would call him. It seemed like he really had too much to drink. Lin Feng's heart churned. He had witnessed the entire scene today. The unhappiness between his captain and Little Spade was obvious. Little Spade was really a withered spade. Between being punished by his captain and being a loyal brother, Lin Feng chose the latter and called Bojio. "Hello, Little Spade? Don't say I'm not loyal, there is a bright path for you to sleep with Captain again. It depends on your courage." Lin Feng crossed his legs as he spoke. "Captain is drunk. His coordinates are at the bar next to a university. He's getting someone to pick him up. Do you want to go?" Bojio didn't hesitate. Her reply made Lin Feng mutter, "Aren't you afraid of death? Only you would dare to target Captain." "I'm near a university, it's convenient to head over. I'll take a cab now." She added, "In the future, if you wish to sleep with Almighty Yun, I'll help you." Lin Feng roared in his heart. "I'm a straight guy, I don't want to sleep with my own brothers." Unfortunately, the phone had already been hung up. Chapter 964. After Bojio hung up, she hopped into a cab. "Sir, the White Knight Bar near a university." At this hour, the traffic was starting to get congested. The cab wasn't going fast. She didn't understand why the Almighty would call Lin Feng, but only a naive person like Lin Feng would ask her to fetch the Almighty. When Bojio alighted, she was prepared for the Almighty's cold stare. After leaving the club, the Almighty went straight to the bar, clearly in a bad mood. He had been like this when he had been young. When he was unhappy, he would reject others. No matter how she tried to coax him, he wouldn't budge. What a troublesome little vixen. Back then she had been thick-skinned. But from the looks of it, she wasn't that thick-skinned. Bojio glanced down at the time on her watch before walking briskly towards the bar. She bypassed the car parked in front of the door and saw a cold figure standing under the neon lights. It was a very noble and different person. Bojio prepared herself mentally. Basically, she was prepared to be rejected. She took another step forward. At this moment she saw him clearly. The Almighty's battle uniform was half open, revealing the white t-shirt underneath. His short black hair and tall nose showed off his beautiful side profile. His facial features were clear, and his eyebrows were clear, and his eyes were clear. He held a cigarette between his slender and fair fingers. Because he had drunk some alcohol, his fringe drooped down, reflecting his deep eyes, making him look even more wanton and unrestrained. The Almighty raised his eyes and glanced at her. It was obvious that he had already sensed her presence. Bojio could hear her heartbeat. She thought of many things she wanted to say, but when she saw the person behind the Almighty, she paused. It was a short-haired girl with a sweet appearance. She seemed to have been standing there for a while, a bright smile on her face. She seemed to be talking to the Almighty. She could vaguely hear the word senior. This was... Bojio paused. She wasn't sure how the girl had come. Was she drinking with the Almighty? Bojio couldn't be blamed for thinking that way. She had never seen anyone so close to the Almighty. Even though they hadn't had any physical contact, there was an indescribable feeling. But there was an indescribable feeling. It seemed like they knew each other? Based on her understanding of the Almighty, if he really hated someone he would definitely ask the other party to leave. Did the Almighty come alone or did he have a date? Bojio wasn't sure if she should continue walking over. At this moment the girl also raised her eyes. At first she was surprised that Gu Shijio would appear. Then she smiled, revealing her dimples. Senior, that's Spade Z, right? He's even more handsome in real life. Chinamo remained silent. Bojio suddenly felt that her presence was unnecessary. Her heart sank and she was about to turn. How long do you want me to stand here alone? He asked in a low and familiar voice. Bojio glanced up. She wasn't sure if he was talking to her. Besides, he didn't seem happy that she was here. The man stubbed out the cigarette in his hand and threw it into the dustbin. He pulled open his uniform jacket and walked towards her. She didn't even have the time to react before he walked towards her. Her vision darkened as someone covered her with a jacket. Bojio was about to move. But the voice beside her ears was still cold. Don't move, I don't want to see you now. Bojio's fingers stilled. She didn't know what to do. As expected, it wasn't a good feeling to be hated by the Almighty. She was so handsome that even the Almighty didn't want to see her face. In the future she wouldn't be able to use this face to win any benefits. Since when did her face become a minus factor? Bojio took a moment. It was too difficult for her to stay still. Just as she was about to take a step, she saw the person walking towards her from under the jacket. Before she could do anything she felt herself being picked up by someone. Didn't he not want to see her? Why, Brother Mo? He ignored her but she could feel his familiar peppermint tobacco scent lingering at the tip of her nose. Bojio didn't move. The tip of her nose touched Chinmo's chest through the jacket. She couldn't see anything as he carried her. Her fingers tightened on the jacket, her heart racing. She didn't understand what the Almighty meant. Was he really going to throw her into the dustbin? After all, the Almighty had been looking at her with disdain, as though he wanted to get rid of her. Speaking of which, why wasn't the Almighty surprised that she was the one who came to fetch him and not the naive Lin Feng? Just as Bojio was thinking about it, she felt herself being placed on the seat of a car. It was probably the Land Rover she was familiar with. Because of the surrounding environment, even if she couldn't see it in front of her, she knew that the furnishings around her were familiar to her. Just as she was about to say something, her chin was lifted. After the jacket was slightly lifted, a cold kiss came in. Bojio's pupils wavered. Her lips were pried open. All she could feel was the aroma of the wine pouring in, and the tipsy feeling made her lose all her thoughts at that moment. The tip of their tongues touched, bringing with it a scent that she hadn't felt for a long time. Bojio could only lean against the seat, unaware of the situation around her. Half her face was covered by the jacket and she was in a sorry state from the kiss. The Land Rover was parked in the parking lot marked out by the bar. There were many people passing by. Chinamo was wearing a white t-shirt, bending over and kissing. Who knew how many people stopped in their direction? That kind of scene seemed to only appear in comics. But no matter how curious they were, they didn't know what the youngster looked like. How exactly did he think of such a way of kissing? They could vaguely see the figure but not the face. But just by looking at the figure, they were definitely good-looking, especially Chinmo's long legs and waist. His half-bent waist exuded an innate aura. Even his kiss was domineering. Those who whistled whistled and those who tossed and turned did it. Chinmo acted as though there was no one else around, kissing her until she was exhausted. After a while he released her and pinched her chin again. He bit her lips, continuing to taste the sweetness that she didn't want to let go of. Bojio didn't know what was going on around her, allowing Chinmo to kiss her. Gradually she lost all her strength. The sounds seemed to have weakened. No matter how loud they became the background in her ears. It was as though there was such a person in this world. When he kissed you, you could only hear your own heartbeat. Everyone saw the kissing scene. Fan Jia, who was standing not far away, saw the entire scene. Her fingers tightened, and when it reached a certain level, her eyes overflowed with venom. She really didn't expect that after planning for such a long time, a chance to drink alone with him, it would be gone just like that. And why was Qin Imo still in such a state after Spade Z saved Hoshino? She had received news that the two of them were in a cold war. And why was he starting to like boys? That person clearly liked girls. She had always thought it was because of the novelty. The novelty was the excitement that the youngster brought him. Because in the esports scene he probably hadn't met such a person. The FC King of Zone C, it was hard not to notice this title. She had seen young Master Fu play before, it was no wonder he was interested. Fanjia had always known that other than Z, Qin Imo was most interested in esports. In the past she had tried to get close to him, but it hadn't been effective. This young master of the Fu family had only occupied that position because he had appeared in the most vacant period of his life. He was really lucky. Fanjia stood there, her gaze deepening. Watching him kiss someone made her want to kill the person he was kissing. It seemed like she hadn't been forceful enough. Fanjia's gaze deepened, but she didn't show any emotions. It was time to find an alliance. Fu Zhongyi was the best candidate. Amidst the envious whistles, Fang Jia disappeared into the night. She believed that as long as she continued to lay low, she would be able to obtain that person completely. She would let young Master Fu have him for a few days, she would snatch him back. Because she knew better than anyone what could attract his interest, in the Land Rover. Bojo sat there, watching the pair of eyes that were as beautiful as the stars, panting softly. She didn't know how she had offended the Almighty. His coat covered him again and his whole body was covered. Through the jacket, the Almighty's lips pressed against her, the fragrance of sandalwood lingering in her bones. His voice was still cold. Who asked you to appear? He didn't want her to show her face. Bojo wanted to lift her lids, but her head was already pressed into his embrace. Then she heard the Almighty on the phone. Drive over. There was a driver? Then why did he get Lin Feng to fetch him? It seemed like the Almighty had drunk too much. Bojo arched a brow, feeling as though the Almighty was looking in her direction. But she couldn't tell what he was thinking. Actually, his thoughts were simple. The moment he saw that person's face, he would lose his principles. Hence, he didn't want to see it. But because of that person in his arms, many feelings changed. The pressure on his chest disappeared without a trace. Even if he didn't see it, he could imagine her gloomy expression. He would leave her alone. That way he wouldn't be able to see through her thoughts. Qin Mo's gaze deepened at the thought of her instinctive protection. After all, she was the most obedient when she was gloomy. Bojo couldn't see any of this, which was indeed gloomy. She couldn't see anything. She tilted her head and heard the sound of the car. After walking for a while, she asked, Brother Imo, when can I show my face? Chapter 965. But Bojo knew it was a light punishment. She sat there for a while. When she felt it was enough, she tried to suggest, Brother Imo, I think you'll feel better when you see my face. I'm so handsome I can beautify the air. I don't need you to beautify the air. His voice was slow, his fingers touching her lips through the jacket. You better be quiet, I don't want to see your face or hear your words, understand? Understood, who couldn't be at Sundra little fairy. Bojo nodded, not saying it out loud. She knew the Almighty didn't want to reconcile with her this time. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror more than once. Boss Qin could just ask someone to leave if he didn't want to see them. Why did he have to cover his face? He turned and planted a kiss on the top of her head. He didn't understand the boss's world. Perhaps no one could understand. He liked someone too much and was a proud person. If it had been someone else, he would have ignored them. But this fellow? He forced himself not to think about it but used Lin Feng to make her appear. Yes, Qin Mo's phone call wasn't something he would make when he was drunk. As the captain of the Supreme Alliance, he knew every member's personality. When that naive Lin Feng received the call, his first reaction would definitely be to inform this fellow. Qin Imo glanced down at the youngster in his arms. He was still thinking about what he should do with her. Since he couldn't think of anything, he decided to bring her home. The Land Rover entered the military courtyard. Bojo's hearing was sensitive, she could hear the sound of the gun. The car stopped. Qin Imo carried the person he had covered with his jacket down and placed her on the bed. Bojo took a moment. The moment she reached her hand out, her lips were kissed again. This time the kiss was deeper. When her head sank into the pillow, her breathing became erratic. Our relationship isn't just in bed, understand? That hoarse voice, accompanied by his breath, landed on her lips. It was still a little cold. You have to take responsibility for provoking me. Bojo muttered, I've always been responsible. Your responsibility is to save Hoshino. Qin Mo's voice was calm. Bojio didn't know how to reply. Qin Mo glanced at her, released her, and stood up. Bojio knew this was the end. She couldn't make up any more stories. Qin Mo's back was facing her as he replied, "Forget it." Bojio's fingers froze. She wanted to say something but it wasn't possible. There was the sound of the door closing. It was obvious that he wanted to chase the guest away. Even though she knew that she didn't want to move. He maintained this position for a while. It was as if it was absorbing the last bit of sunlight. The night outside began to turn dark. Qin Mo sat in the study room that was just a wall away from his bedroom. Listening to the commotion, he tilted his head and lit a cigarette. He held the silver cigarette lighter in his hand, and when he flipped it over, he saw that it was a USB flash drive. If not for Lin Feng's call, she probably didn't even think to ask where he was. Things that were forced would always be very painful to prick. Even the gifts were the same. There was a moment of silence. Qin Mo knew she was about to leave. He smoked a cigarette as if that was the only way to suppress the boredom. Just as he turned his head, the study room door was pried open. The person who pried open the door stood there. "I'll leave after I help you apply the ointment." Qin Mo extinguished the cigarette, his voice calm. "Someone will be here in a while." Her only excuse to stay was gone. Bojio finally understood that the Almighty didn't want to see her. They had never been so polite with each other. Until a sound from downstairs broke the silence. Movie Queenan was back. She walked over when she saw the light in the study room. With just one look she could see the problem between them. Just as Bojio was about to leave, he grabbed her. "Gio, since you're here, I have something to ask for your opinion. Don't leave today, let's have a good talk." Bojio glanced at Qin Mo, replying, "All right." Qin Mo's clenched fists loosened as the word left his lips. Since they were going to stay, they definitely had to eat dinner. Movie Queen had already decided to arrange for them to sit together. But that was all in the future. Movie Queen was smart. She never asked the children what had happened. She did have something to look for Bojio. "I have a movie, the director has asked me twice to be his lobbyist." Movie Queen added a piece of bacon. "I think the role is suitable for you. Why don't you take on the role and I'll tell you about the weakness of my cold son." Bojio never knew how to reject someone like Movie Queen. "I have to wait until after the competition, but I'm not sure what the situation will be. Besides, I don't know how to act." Once the competition ended, she would find an opportunity to leave. "It doesn't matter." Movie Queen reached out to pinch the youngster's face. "You don't have to act, the director said you can just sit in front of the computer and play games. You can appear as yourself. That's all, just treat it as a favor." Since Movie Queen said that, Bojio couldn't reject her. "The director is looking for an esports player?" "No, it's a hacker." Movie Queen was delighted. "In the movie it's my son. I've always wanted a handsome and caring son like Gio. Your brother Mo is too cold, not cute at all." It wasn't easy to reply. Bojio lowered her head and ate the rice in her bowl. She couldn't help glancing at the empty seat beside her. Deep down, she knew why the Almighty hadn't come down to eat. It was because of her. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.